I had always considered myself a keen observer, a trait that served me well in my line of work as a freelance journalist. My stories often delved into the obscure and the overlooked, the kind of pieces that made you look twice at the ordinary world around you. But nothing had prepared me for the oddity that unfolded right in my suburban neighborhood. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, with the house across the street. The Hendersons lived there, a middle-aged couple of no particular note, their lives as mundane as their two-story home. But one morning, as I sipped my coffee by the window, I noticed something peculiar about their house. It seemed to have one more window than I remembered. At first, I brushed it off as a trick of the light or a lapse in my own observation. But as days passed, the anomaly became undeniable. Each morning, there appeared to be one more window on the Hendersons' house than the day before. I mentioned it casually to friends and family, but they laughed it off, suggesting I needed a break from my work. Yet, the mystery gnawed at me. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was deeply wrong. It was this curiosity, this insatiable need to uncover the truth, that led me down a path I could never have imagined, into a world where reality itself seemed to warp and twist. My obsession grew as the days passed. I found myself sketching the Hendersons' house, trying to map out the impossible architecture that unfolded before my eyes. Each new window seemed to appear randomly, altering the facade in subtle but unnerving ways. The house began to look less like a suburban home, and more like a grotesque puzzle, each window a piece that didn't quite fit. One evening, under the guise of a casual stroll, I ventured closer to the house. The street was quiet, the twilight casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns. As I approached, a chill ran down my spine. The new windows were not just architectural anomalies, they emitted a faint, unsettling light, as if something within was beckoning me. I stood there, on the sidewalk, staring at the house. The windows varied in shape and size, some small and round, others large and arched. But it was the light that unnerved me the most. It was neither the warm glow of household lamps, nor the sterile brightness of LEDs. It was otherworldly, shimmering with colors I couldn't name. That night, I lay awake, my mind racing with questions. What was happening inside that house? Who or what was responsible for the changing facade? And why did it feel like the windows were watching me, waiting for something? My journalistic instinct told me there was a story here, something far bigger and stranger than anything I'd ever covered. Little did I know, my curiosity was about to lead me into the depths of a mystery far darker and more dangerous than any story I had ever chased. In the days that followed, my life began to twist into a narrative I no longer controlled. Objects in my house, books, keys, even my coffee mug would move or disappear without explanation. At night, I heard whispers, faint and unintelligible, as if carried by a wind that didn't exist. And the shadows in my home lingered longer, clinging to the corners with an almost palpable presence. Driven by a mix of fear and fascination, I started researching the history of the Hendersons' house. The local library held a trove of old newspapers and property records, painting a picture of the house's past. It was built in the early 1900s by a reclusive architect, Arthur Langley, whose designs were as eccentric as they were rare. Rumors swirled about Langley's dabbling in occult practices, his obsession with otherworldly architecture, and his sudden, unexplained disappearance. The Hendersons themselves were an enigma. They rarely left the house, and on the few occasions I saw them, their appearances struck me as odd. Their skin was too pale, their movements too rigid, as if they were poorly animated characters in a simulation. Their eyes, when they met mine, were void of emotion, sending a shiver down my spine. Each new revelation added layers to the mystery, but offered no answers. The windows continued to multiply, each new one a silent sentinel to the madness unfolding within. I felt like a moth drawn to a flame, knowing the danger, but unable to resist the pull. One evening, as I sat in my living room, trying to piece together the scattered fragments of information, a realization hit me. The whispers I heard at night, the shifting shadows, the sense of being watched had all intensified whenever I thought about the house. It was as if my attention, my fear and curiosity, were feeding something. And then, the most disturbing change occurred. I woke one morning to find a new window on the wall of my own bedroom, a small, circular pane that hadn't been there the night before. It looked out onto a landscape I couldn't recognize, a twisted, nightmarish version of my own neighborhood, bathed in an eerie, ethereal light. The sight of that window in my own home was the final push I needed. I had to know what was inside the Hendersons' house. I had to understand the force that was altering my reality. That night, I made up my mind to enter the house and uncover its secrets, no matter the cost. It was a decision that would lead me into the heart of darkness, into a world where the boundaries of reality were as malleable as clay, and just as easily shattered. The night I chose to enter the Hendersons' house was cloaked in a suffocating silence, the kind that amplifies every heartbeat and breath. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and a pounding heart, I approached the house. The multitude of windows glowed faintly, like eyes in the dark, watching my every move. I found one of the newer windows unlocked. Drawing a deep breath, I slid it open and climbed inside. The room I entered was unfamiliar, starkly different from the mundane interior I had glimpsed through the windows in the past. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with ancient, leather-bound books, their titles etched in languages I couldn't understand. As I ventured deeper, the house revealed its impossible nature. Corridors twisted in on themselves, staircases led to ceilings, and rooms were larger on the inside than they appeared from the outside. The laws of physics seemed to have been rewritten within these walls. In one room, a grand piano played itself, the keys moving with a frenzied urgency, but producing no sound. In another, a series of mirrors reflected not my image, but scenes of other places, other times some idyllic, others nightmarish. I realized then that the house was not just a structure, it was a living, breathing entity, its rooms and hallways an extension of its consciousness. And it was aware of me, its corridors reshaping and reorienting to guide me, or perhaps to trap me. Finally, I found myself in a vast, dimly lit chamber, the heart of the house. In the center stood a figure, its form blurred and shifting, a spectral amalgamation of architect and abomination. It was Arthur Langley, or what remained of him, absorbed and transformed by his own creation. He spoke, his voice a chorus of whispers, echoing around the room. He told me of his quest to transcend the mundane, to create a space where the physical and the ethereal merged. His experiments had opened a doorway, but instead of finding enlightenment, he had become a prisoner, his consciousness bound to the ever-changing house. As he spoke, the windows around us shimmered with otherworldly light, revealing fleeting glimpses of distant worlds, horrors, and beauties beyond comprehension. I understood then that the house was a nexus, a point where multiple realities converged, fueled by the thoughts and emotions of those it ensnared. Langley's final words were a warning and a plea. He told me that the house would continue to grow, to ensnare, driven by the curiosity and fear of others. He begged me to leave, to forget the house and let it fade into obscurity. But as I turned to leave, I felt the house's grip tighten. The corridors twisted violently, the windows flickered with malevolent intensity. It was not going to let me go easily. The house had fed on my curiosity, grown stronger with my attention, and now it craved more. With every ounce of willpower, I raced through the shifting halls, the house groaning and screeching around me. I reached the window through which I had entered and hurled myself out, tumbling onto the lawn. Lying there, gasping for breath, I watched as the house returned to its normal, suburban facade, its windows no longer glowing. But the terror I felt was not relieved, it was compounded by the knowledge of what lay behind that ordinary exterior. In the days that followed, I tried to return to my normal life, but the experience had left a deep scar. I saw the house in my dreams, its windows multiplying, its corridors twisting. I avoided looking at it, but its presence was always there, at the edge of my vision, a constant reminder of the night I had barely escaped. My perception of the world had been irrevocably altered. Windows everywhere seemed to whisper secrets, buildings appeared to change when I looked away. The mundane world I had once inhabited now seemed like a thin veneer over a reality much stranger and more terrifying. I attempted to write about my experience, to exercise it through words, but the story seemed too fantastical, too unhinged. Who would believe a tale of a house that defied the laws of nature, of an architect consumed by his own creation? The Hendersons remained elusive, their presence in the neighborhood like a silent accusation. I wondered if they were prisoners like Langley, or something else entirely, a part of the house's machinations. I wanted to warn others, to tell them to stay away from the house, but I feared drawing more attention to it. I feared that my obsession might feed it further, might lead others down the same dark path I had walked. And so, I live with the knowledge of what exists within that ordinary house, of the entity that lurks behind its ever-multiplying windows. The house appears normal to everyone else, but I can still see the extra windows, each one a dark watchful eye. But the true horror came one quiet morning, when I awoke to find a window in my own house that didn't belong. A small oval window, high on the wall of my bedroom, looking out onto a world that wasn't mine. I keep the curtain closed, try to ignore the faint light that seeps through the edges, but I know it's there. A part of me wonders what I would see if I dared to look, to gaze into that other world. And in that wondering, I feel the house's influence, a silent siren call to return to its labyrinthine halls, to uncover its secrets. But I resist, for I know that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The window remains, a silent sentinel, a reminder of the night I glimpsed beyond the veil of reality, and of the fact that, whatever lies behind those multiplying windows, it is still out there, waiting. The house stood alone at the edge of a small, unnamed town, like a forgotten relic from a bygone era. Its weathered walls and creaky wooden floors spoke of years gone by, and the large, overgrown garden that surrounded it was a testament to its prolonged solitude. I had moved into this house a few weeks ago, drawn by its isolation and the quiet it promised a perfect haven for a freelance writer like me, seeking solace and inspiration away from the bustling city life. My days quickly settled into a routine. Mornings were for writing, afternoons for long walks in the surrounding woods, and evenings for reading by the fireplace. The house, with all its quirks and creaks, felt like a character in itself, adding a unique backdrop to my daily life. However, as days passed, a subtle sense of unease began to grow within me, an inexplicable feeling that I was not entirely alone. The locals, whom I encountered on my occasional trips to the town for supplies, were friendly, but always maintained a respectful distance. Their conversations often hushed when I approached, and I could sense their eyes on me, heavy with unspoken thoughts. I knew the house had a history, one that the townspeople were reluctant to share, but my curiosity was piqued. Little did I know, my quest for solitude would soon turn into a confrontation with the unknown. It was a rainy evening, the kind where the world outside seemed blurred and distant. I was immersed in writing, the rhythmic tapping of rain against the window panes, a soothing background to my thoughts. That's when I first heard it knock at the door. Startled, I glanced at the clock. It was past 9 p.m., an unusual time for visitors in this secluded part of town. I stood up, stretching my stiff limbs, and walked to the door, expecting perhaps a delivery I had forgotten about or a traveler lost in the storm. But when I opened the door, I was met with nothing but the pouring rain and the darkness of the night. Puzzled, I stepped out, peering into the shadows, but there was no sign of anyone. I concluded it must have been kids playing a prank and returned to my work, brushing off the incident. However, the knocks continued, each night, always at the same time. Every instance revealed the same emptiness outside my door. It was unsettling, the consistency of it. I began to feel a sense of dread each night as the clock neared the hour, my heart rate increasing with every tick. It wasn't just the knocking that unnerved me, I started feeling a persistent sensation of being watched, and sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I thought I heard whispers, so faint that I couldn't be sure if they were real or just figments of my imagination. This pattern disrupted my peace, turning my haven into a place of growing anxiety. I tried talking to the locals about it, but they just exchanged nervous glances and quickly changed the subject. Their avoidance only fueled my unease, making me feel more isolated in my experiences. The once comforting solitude of the house was now replaced with a lingering fear, a feeling that something unseen was sharing the space with me, something that didn't quite belong to the world of the living. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I began researching the history of the house. The local library was a small, dusty room at the back of the town hall, with archives that smelled of old paper and secrets. Through faded newspapers and town records, I pieced together a tale of the previous inhabitant, a reclusive man who, one day, vanished without a trace. The only legacy he left behind were whispered tales of an unseen entity he claimed roamed the halls of the house. As days turned into weeks, the disturbances in the house escalated. It started with small, easily dismissible occurrences, a book falling off a shelf, a picture frame askew. But soon, these incidents grew more frequent and impossible to ignore. Doors would slam shut in the middle of the night, cold drafts appeared in closed rooms, and I would often find my belongings not where I had left them. It felt as if the house itself was alive, its invisible inhabitant making its presence known in subtle yet undeniable ways. My isolation deepened. I felt cut off from the world outside, my phone calls to friends and family going unanswered, as if the house itself was interfering with my attempts to reach out. The locals' reluctance to engage with me only added to my sense of solitude. In desperation, I installed cameras around the house, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was causing the disturbances. Night after night, I reviewed the footage, only to find nothing. The cameras showed the empty rooms, undisturbed and peaceful, directly contradicting the chaos I experienced. This disparity between what I saw and what the cameras captured only heightened my sense of paranoia. It was as if the entity knew it was being watched and reveled in its ability to remain unseen. The house, once a place of refuge, had become a prison of sorts, its walls echoing with sounds that shouldn't exist. I was living in a constant state of heightened alertness, every shadow and noise, sending a jolt of fear through me. The boundary between reality and imagination blurred, leaving me to question my own sanity. The climax of my ordeal came on a stormy night, when the rain was more torrential than ever, lashing against the house with an almost angry fervor. The knocking, which had become a dreaded part of my nightly routine, transformed that night. It was no longer a series of gentle taps, but a frantic thunderous banging that echoed through the hallways. My heart pounded in my chest, each bang resonating with my own fear. Something within me snapped, the need to confront whatever was tormenting me outweighed the terror that gripped my heart. I strode towards the door, determined to face whatever lay beyond it. As I flung the door open, the wind howled in, but again, there was no one there. The darkness outside seemed to stare back at me, an abyss from which anything could emerge. But it wasn't the emptiness of the night that froze me to my spot, it was what happened next. The air around me grew colder, and a shiver ran down my spine. My eyes began to play tricks on me, or so I thought. In the corners of the rooms, in the reflections of the windows, I caught glimpses of someone. A figure, ghostly and distorted, with a face so disfigured it was barely human. But every time I blinked, it vanished, leaving me to question if it was ever there. Panic set in, a primal, all-consuming terror. I ran through the house, trying to escape the presence I felt looming over me. But it was as if the house itself was a maze, the corridors and rooms twisting and turning in impossible ways. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony that filled my ears with an indecipherable language. In a last-ditch effort, I locked myself in my study, panting and trembling. The room felt safe, familiar. But as my breathing slowed and I looked around, I realized I wasn't alone. There, in the faint glow of my desk lamp, stood the figure, its twisted features barely inches from mine. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, my voice caught in my throat. The figure didn't speak, didn't move, its existence a silent testament to the unknown horrors that lurked within the house. The realization that this entity was not just a figment of my imagination but something real and tangible, filled me with a dread unlike anything I had ever felt. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, the figure vanished, leaving me alone in the room, my heart racing and my mind reeling from the encounter. The morning after the storm, I awoke on the floor of my study, the memories of the night before flooding back in a terrifying rush. The sun streamed through the windows, its rays doing little to dispel the cold fear that clung to me. The house was eerily silent, as if the storm and the events it brought with it were nothing but a dream. But the sense of dread that enveloped me was all too real. In the following days, the atmosphere in the house shifted. The entity, whatever it was, had made its presence unequivocally known. The disturbances that once seemed random now felt like deliberate attempts to communicate or perhaps to torment. Objects would move right before my eyes, doors would slam shut as I approached, and the temperature would drop inexplicably in certain rooms. I tried to leave, packing my bags with a frenzied urgency. But every attempt was thwarted. My car wouldn't start, the roads out of town were inexplicably blocked, and my phone could no longer find any signal. It was as if the house, or the entity within it, was keeping me there. Nightmares plagued my sleep, vivid and disturbing. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if urging me towards something I couldn't understand. I was trapped in a cycle of fear and confusion, the lines between reality and the supernatural blurring beyond recognition. The house no longer felt like my home, but a haunted prison, its walls echoing with the remnants of something ancient and unknowable. As the days melded into an indistinguishable haze, I came to a disturbing realization. My life was no longer my own. It belonged, in part, to the unseen entity that shared this space with me. There was a perverse sense of acceptance that settled over me, a surrender to the bizarre and terrifying reality of my existence within these walls. The entity, though never visible in its entirety again, remained a constant presence in my life. The unexplainable occurrences became routine, almost mundane in their regularity. I found myself speaking to it at times, asking questions to the empty air, half expecting a response that never came. My writing, once a source of joy and escape, became my tether to sanity. I wrote about my experiences, the fears, the sights and sounds of a house haunted by something that defied explanation. The act of putting pen to paper gave me a sense of control, a way to impose order on the chaos that had enveloped my life. The story ends with me still in the house, unable to leave, yet no longer trying to. I had become a part of the house's lore, another chapter in its long and mysterious history. My days were spent chronicling the surreal nature of my cohabitation with the unseen entity, my nights listening to the whispers that seemed to seep out of the very walls. In the final scene, I sit at my desk, writing the last lines of this account. The air around me is cold, the feeling of being watched ever present. But there is a strange comfort in the familiarity of it all. The story closes not with the resolution, but with an acceptance of the unresolved, the unknown. The entity remains, its intentions unclear, its nature an enigma. And I, its unwilling companion, continue to live in the shadow of its presence, the lines between the haunted and the haunter forever blurred. The only truth I hold on to is that the entity and I are bound together in this dance of the supernatural, each a prisoner in our own way. And as I set my pen down, I wonder if this story will ever truly end, or if it will linger on, like the whispers in the dark, a tale of the unseen visitor that became a part of my life. Silence was a rare luxury in my life, one that I had come to cherish in the sprawling confines of my mansion, nestled away from the prying eyes of the public and the press. It was a grand structure, opulent in every sense, a fitting residence for someone of my stature. Jonathan Turnwell, a name that once commanded respect and controversy in equal measure. My days as a prominent politician were behind me, yet the echoes of my influence lingered. The walls of my home were adorned with memorabilia from my career, framed newspaper articles, photographs with dignitaries, and tokens of appreciation from my supporters. Among these were my catchphrases, the words that had become synonymous with my identity. Seal the gates, Devious Douglas, and the one that always brought a wry smile to my face, utter chicanery. Life in solitude was a choice, one I made to escape the relentless scrutiny that came with power. But isolation had its price, and I often found myself longing for the adulation and the adrenaline of my past life. One morning, as I perused through the mail, I noticed a plain envelope, addressed to me in an unfamiliar, almost archaic handwriting. Curious, I slid it open. Inside was a note, a single line that froze me in my tracks. The fence just got 10 feet higher. My own words, thrown back at me. It was unsettling, yet I dismissed it as a prank by a former adversary or a disgruntled staffer. But it was just the beginning. Over the next few days, more letters arrived, each bearing a phrase I had popularized, a taunt hidden beneath the familiarity of my own rhetoric. Devious Douglas never knew what hit him, one read. Another, more ominous, stated, "Malarkey is the mother of deceit." I was unnerved, yes, but also strangely intrigued. Who could be orchestrating such a bizarre charade? It was a late evening when the true nature of my situation revealed itself. I had just retired to my study, a glass of aged scotch in hand, when I noticed something odd about my reflection in the mirror. For a moment, it seemed to shimmer, and then, in the foggy glass, words appeared, as if written by an invisible hand. Cough awaits. My heart raced. This was no prank. Someone, or something, was in my home, toying with me. I searched the room frantically, but found no one. The house was silent, save for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination perhaps. But deep down, I knew I was facing something far beyond my understanding. The whispers of my past were coming alive in the shadows of my mansion, and I could not escape them. That night, I lay awake, listening to the creaks and groans of the house, each sound a sinister symphony that played upon my fears. My mind raced with questions. Was I being haunted by a vengeful spirit? Or was it my conscience, manifesting the guilt and regrets I had buried deep within? The once comforting solitude of my mansion had turned into a prison, and I was its sole tormented inmate. As the clock chimed midnight, I realized that my secluded sanctuary had become the stage for a chilling, unfathomable mystery, one that I was now compelled to unravel. The following days were a blur of unease and paranoia. Each morning began with the same ritual, a hesitant walk to the mailbox, bracing myself for the next message. The letters kept arriving, each one more cryptic than the last, alluding to my past speeches and decisions. Malarkey is the foundation of faltering empires, one taunted. They were a constant reminder of my once powerful presence now seemingly turned against me. The mansion, my once cherished haven, felt increasingly oppressive. Corridors that I had walked with pride now seemed to stretch endlessly, as if mocking my solitude. Portraits that I once gazed upon with a sense of accomplishment now appeared to watch me with a mixture of pity and disdain. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows seemed to linger a bit too long, and the silence was often broken by faint, inexplicable noises, a whisper here, a soft thud there, always just out of sight, always just beyond reach. One evening, as I traversed the dimly lit hallway, a sudden cold draft made me shiver. A door, previously unnoticed, stood ajar. I was certain it hadn't been there before, or perhaps I had simply never paid it any attention. My curiosity, mixed with a growing sense of dread, propelled me forward. Inside was a room that defied explanation, walls covered with newspaper clippings about my career, photographs of my rallies, and even some of my personal belongings. In the center stood a mannequin, dressed in a suit eerily similar to one I owned, with a faceless head. Around its neck hung a sign with the words utter chicanery, one of my favorite sayings. The most chilling aspect, however, was the audio recorder on a small table. I pressed play, and the room filled with my own voice, snippets of speeches and interviews, all out of context, creating a disjointed, haunting monologue. It was as if someone had been collecting pieces of my life, my identity, and twisted them into this grotesque shrine. I left the room feeling violated, as though someone had rifled through my soul and laid it bare in that bizarre chamber. The walls of my mansion no longer offered safety, they were canvas for a twisted artist, using my past as paint. Sleep eluded me. I spent the nights wandering the halls, half expecting to confront an intruder, yet finding nothing but echoes of my own footsteps. The mansion was like a labyrinth, and I, its lost and bewildered minotaur, trapped in a maze of my own making. As the days passed, the incidents grew more brazen. Objects moved of their own accord, and my own recorded voice would sometimes greet me when I entered a room. The words were always the same, phrases I had spoken with confidence and authority, now turned into a sinister chorus mocking my current predicament. I was a prisoner in my own home, a home that had turned against me, echoing my past with every creaking floorboard and whispering wind. My legacy, once a source of pride, had become a haunting specter, and I was left to wonder whether I was losing my grip on reality, or if the very essence of my being was being unraveled by an unseen, malevolent force. The unsettling occurrences in my mansion escalated, each new event more disturbing than the last. My once peaceful nights were now punctuated by nightmares, visions of my past actions and words twisted into. I began to notice changes within the mansion during my restless wanderings. Paintings that once depicted landscapes and portraits were now inexplicably altered. Their subjects seemed to glare at me with accusatory eyes. The very structure of the house seemed to morph subtly, with corridors twisting into unfamiliar configurations, leading me to dead ends and rooms I had never seen before. One particularly harrowing evening, as I roamed the halls, a sudden, sharp noise startled me. Turning a corner, I came upon a scene that stopped me in my tracks. My grand dining room, typically a place of solitude and reflection, was now set for a ghastly feast. The table was adorned with fine china and silverware, but the centerpieces were macabre sculptures crafted from what appeared to be bones and scraps of cloth. At the head of the table sat the faceless mannequin, its presence now a recurring symbol of my torment. As I stood there, frozen in horror, the lights flickered and dimmed, casting eerie shadows across the room. A low murmur filled the air, a cacophony of voices whispering my own catchphrases. "Seal the gates, devious Douglas, utter chicanery." The words swirled around me, a storm of accusations and mockery. I fled the room, my heart pounding in my chest. The mansion was no longer just reflecting my past, it was reliving it, forcing me to confront the consequences of my actions and words. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I was being haunted not by a ghost or a spirit, but by the very essence of my being, my legacy turned against me. The days blurred into a continuous loop of terror and confusion. I stopped venturing outside, fearing what I might find. My meals were taken in my study, the only room that seemed to offer a semblance of normalcy, though even there, I could feel the oppressive weight of the house's judgment. I began to question my sanity, wondering if the isolation and guilt had finally taken their toll. Was I experiencing a breakdown, or was there truly a supernatural force at work, feeding off my fears and regrets? The once grandiose halls of my mansion had become a twisted funhouse, each room a new chapter in my nightmarish ordeal. The whispering voices grew louder, more insistent, as if urging me to acknowledge the sins of my past. But the most chilling realization was yet to come, the notion that I might not be alone in this hellish landscape, that there might be something else residing within these walls, something born from my own hubris and arrogance. The unrelenting hauntings within the walls of my mansion reached a crescendo, each incident more bizarre and terrifying than the last. The once grand corridors now felt like oppressive tunnels, leading me further into a psychological abyss. The air itself seemed thick with a malevolent presence, one that thrived on my growing fear and confusion. As the days passed, my grip on reality began to fray. The line between wakefulness and nightmares blurred, with haunting visions seeping into my every waking moment. I would see fleeting glimpses of figures in the corners of my eyes, hear my name whispered by unseen lips, feel the brush of phantom fingers against my skin. Then came the night of the storm, an evening where nature itself seemed to conspire with the malevolence that had infested my home. Thunder rumbled ominously, shaking the foundations of the mansion, as lightning cast stark fleeting shadows across the rooms. It was during this tempest that I encountered the most harrowing manifestation of my torment. In the midst of the storm, I ventured down to the cellar, driven by a compulsion I couldn't explain. The descent felt like a journey into the very heart of my nightmares. The cellar was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from the occasional flash of lightning that penetrated the small windows near the ceiling. As I stood there, in the oppressive gloom, a figure emerged from the shadows. At first, I thought it a trick of the light, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was no illusion. There, standing before me, was a doppelganger, an apparition bearing my likeness, but twisted and distorted, as if reflected in a funhouse mirror. The phantom spoke, its voice a chilling echo of my own, laced with malice and scorn. It recited my catchphrases, sealed the gates, devious Douglas, each word dripping with derision. But it was not just mimicking me, it was mocking me, throwing my own words back at me with a venom I had never known. I stood frozen, transfixed by this specter that seemed both part of me and wholly other. It was as though I was staring into a dark mirror, one that reflected not just my image, but the essence of my being. The phantom was the embodiment of my ego, my lust for power, the darker aspects of my personality that I had long refused to acknowledge. The confrontation was more than just a physical encounter, it was a psychological battle. The phantom taunted me with reminders of my controversial past, the decisions I had made, the people I had used and discarded in my climb to power. It accused me of hubris, of believing myself untouchable, above the consequences of my actions. As the storm raged around us, I realized that this entity was not an invader in my home, it was a manifestation of my own conscience, a creation of my deepest fears and regrets. I had become haunted not by a ghost, but by the very legacy I had built. The encounter left me shaken to my core. As the storm abated and the phantom receded into the shadows, I was left with a profound sense of unease. The mansion, my palace of solitude, had become a purgatory, a place where the echoes of my past were inescapable. In that moment, I understood the true nature of my torment. The mansion was not just a house, it was a reflection of my soul, a mirror to the parts of myself I had long sought to ignore. The hauntings were not punishments, they were revelations, forcing me to confront the man I had become. In the wake of the storm and my harrowing encounter with the phantom, a profound change began to take root within me. The mansion, once a symbol of my power and legacy, now stood as a haunting reminder of the man I had once been. The grandeur and opulence that had once comforted me now seemed grotesque, a facade masking the emptiness of my ambitions. The days that followed were a period of deep introspection. I roamed the halls of my mansion, each room a chapter from my past, each artifact a testament to a life driven by power and ego. The whispers and hauntings, once a source of terror, now served as a constant prompt, urging me to reflect on the path I had chosen. I began to realize that the specter I had faced was not just a manifestation of my darkest impulses, but also a call to redemption. It was a chance to confront the parts of myself that I had long denied, the hubris, the arrogance, the callousness with which I had wielded my power. Determined to break free from the chains of my past, I started to make amends. I reached out to old allies and adversaries alike, offering apologies and seeking forgiveness for past transgressions. I devoted myself to philanthropic efforts, using my wealth and influence to support causes I had once ignored or opposed. Yet, the hauntings did not cease. The phantom, the whispers, the shifting shadows, they continued to pervade the mansion, the constant reminder that redemption is not a destination but a journey. Each encounter with the supernatural elements of the house now served as a moment of reflection, a chance to assess the progress I had made and the distance I still had to travel. Despite my efforts, a lingering sense of unease remained. I realized that while I could seek forgiveness from others, the most challenging absolution to attain was self-forgiveness. The specter of my past self, with its mocking echo of my own voice, was a daily confrontation with the mansion, once a fortress of solitude, had become a crucible for transformation. The once intimidating corridors now felt like passages through my own psyche, each step forward a move towards a deeper understanding of myself. The haunting experiences, rather than terrifying, had taken on a more reflective quality, guiding me through the labyrinth of my own conscience. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I began to embrace the hauntings as a necessary part of my journey. The mansion, with its shifting walls and echoing voices, was no longer a prison, but a place of healing and growth. It was as if the house itself was adapting to my transformation, its once menacing presence now a guiding force. In this strange, surreal environment, I continued my quest for redemption, understanding that the path would be lifelong and fraught with challenges. The echoes of my past would always be a part of me, but they no longer defined me. Instead, they served as a reminder of the man I once was, and the man I strive to become. As the seasons changed, so did the nature of my existence within the walls of the mansion. The hauntings, once a source of unrelenting terror, had become a surreal part of my daily life, a bizarre yet constant companion on my journey toward redemption. The mansion, with its shifting rooms and whispering walls, seemed to reflect my inner transformation, morphing from a house of horrors into a sanctum of self-discovery. Despite the progress I had made, the specter of my former self continued to haunt me, a relentless reminder of the man I was striving to leave behind. This phantom, once an embodiment of my darkest aspects, had taken on a different role. It no longer sought to torment me but to challenge me, pushing me to confront the uncomfortable truths of my past. One evening, as I sat in my study, the room dimly lit by the flickering flame of a single candle, I felt a familiar presence. The temperature dropped, and the air grew thick with anticipation. I turned to see the specter, my twisted doppelganger, standing in the doorway. But this time, the encounter felt different. There was no malice in its eyes, only a profound sadness, a reflection of my own remorse. We spoke, not with words, but through a shared understanding, a silent conversation between two halves of the same soul. The specter conveyed its message, a culmination of all the hauntings, all the whispered words and shifting shadows. It was a message of forgiveness, not from the world, but from myself. The realization hit me with the force of a revelation. The hauntings were not a punishment but a path to salvation, a way to reconcile with the parts of myself I had long suppressed. The specter, my ghostly twin, was a manifestation of my own conscience, a guide leading me through the darkness of my past, and into the light of self-acceptance. With this understanding, the specter slowly faded, its form dissolving into the air, leaving behind a sense of peace that filled the room. I knew that this was not an end but a beginning, the start of a new chapter in my life. The mansion, once a labyrinth of terror, had become a place of reflection and growth. The hauntings had ceased, but their echoes remained, woven into the very fabric of the house, a permanent reminder of the journey I had undertaken. As I walked the halls, now free from the oppressive weight of my past, I understood that the true hauntings were the memories and regrets we carry within us. The mansion, with its shifting rooms and echoing voices, was merely a reflection of my own psyche, a mirror to the soul. In the end, I emerged from the mansion a changed man, no longer burdened by the specter of my former self. The echoes of my past still whispered in the corners of the rooms, but they no longer held power over me. They were simply reminders of the man I once was and the man I had become. The mansion, my once cursed abode, stood as a testament to my transformation, a haunted house turned haven of redemption. And as I stepped outside, into the light of a new dawn, I knew that while the journey was far from over, I was finally on the path to true peace, both within the walls of my home and within myself. I remember the day I stumbled upon the ad for the retreat like it was yesterday. The monotonous gray of my cubicle walls seemed to close in around me, each tick of the clock, a stark reminder of the mundane cycle my life had become. I was Mel, a mid-level office worker with nothing but a stack of papers and a half-dead office plant for company. That was until an online ad caught my eye, flashing images of a luxurious retreat nestled in a lush, hidden valley. Transform your life, it promised. A change was exactly what I needed. The retreat was named Elysium Fields, a name that evoked images of paradise. The charismatic leader of the retreat, Dominic, was the embodiment of success. His photos showed a man with a magnetic presence, standing beside flashy Bugattis, boasting about his MMA triumphs, and making grandiose chess moves. He was a Tade-like figure, someone who seemed to have mastered the art of living. Upon arrival, the reality of Elysium Fields surpassed even the alluring images I had seen online. The sprawling estate was breathtaking, with manicured gardens, sparkling fountains, and facilities that screamed luxury. The staff greeted me with warm smiles, ushering me into a world of opulence I had only dreamed of. My fellow attendees were an eclectic mix of the wealthy, the ambitious, and the curious, all drawn in by the promise of transformation. Dominic's welcome speech was an event in itself. He stood on a grand balcony, overlooking us as if he were a modern-day king addressing his court. His voice was captivating, weaving tales of success and the importance of luxury as a reflection of one's worth. He spoke of his accomplishments, his collection of supercars, his prowess in MMA, and his strategic mastery of chess. Here at Elysium Fields, he declared, you will learn what it means to truly live. But it was his fixation on sparkling water that struck me as peculiar. This, Dominic announced, holding up a crystal glass filled with effervescent liquid, is the elixir of the successful. To drink it is to embrace the life you deserve. He proposed a toast, and like clockwork, the staff distributed glasses of the sparkling water to each guest. We raised our glasses in unison, the clinking sound echoing off the high walls, marking the beginning of what I hoped would be my transformation. Little did I know, it was the start of something far more sinister. The first few days at Elysium Fields were a blur of extravagant activities and seminars. Every morning started with a toast of sparkling water, which Dominic insisted was vital for our transformation. I couldn't deny the appeal, the water had a unique taste that seemed to invigorate the mind. But it wasn't just the water that was transformative. Dominic's teachings, focused on achieving the pinnacle of success and luxury, began to resonate with me. I felt myself drawn into his world, captivated by his vision of what life could be. But it wasn't just about the lavish lifestyle. Dominic's philosophy was deeply ingrained in every aspect of the retreat. We were encouraged to compete in various activities, from chess tournaments that mimicked Dominic's strategic thinking to intense MMA-style workouts that tested our physical limits. The winners were often rewarded with prizes and rare vintages of sparkling water, further reinforcing the belief in its mystical properties. As the days passed, I noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The attendees, initially friendly and diverse in their backgrounds, began to change. Conversations started to revolve solely around wealth, status, and material possessions. The term brokies, previously unheard of, became a common slur used to mock those who failed at the retreat's activities. A sense of aggressive competition replaced the initial camaraderie. One night, while walking back to my room, I overheard a heated argument between two attendees. They were boasting about their wealth and achievements, their voices dripping with contempt for those less successful. It was a far cry from the enlightened discussions I had anticipated when I signed up for the retreat. That was the moment I realized something was amiss at Elysium Fields. The change was subtle yet pervasive, and it was then I decided to delve deeper into the true nature of this retreat and its enigmatic leader. My curiosity, however, would soon lead me down a path far darker than I could have imagined. My suspicion about the retreat grew each day, as I watched the transformation of the attendees. The once diverse group now seemed like replicas of one another, parroting Dominic's ideologies and obsessing over material wealth. The sparkling water, once a symbol of luxury, now felt like a chain binding us to Dominic's will. Determined to uncover the truth, I began my investigation discreetly. My first step was to explore the retreat's grounds under the guise of evening strolls. The estate was vast, with areas that seemed off-limits to guests. I noticed staff members carrying crates of sparkling water towards these restricted areas, their expressions stern and focused. One night, I managed to follow a staff member to a secluded part of the estate. Hidden behind thick foliage was a small building, emitting a faint eerie glow. As I peered through a window, I saw rows of tanks filled with sparkling water, connected to a strange pulsating mass at the center. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, a living entity that seemed to be infusing the water with its essence. My heart raced as the reality of the situation dawned on me. The sparkling water wasn't just a symbol of luxury, it was a medium for something unnatural, something that Dominic was using to influence the minds of the attendees. The changes in behavior, the obsession with status, it all made sense now. Dominic was feeding this entity with our greed and vanity, turning us into mindless followers of his twisted vision. I rushed back to my room, my mind reeling from the discovery. I knew I had to act fast. The retreat was no longer a haven of transformation, it was a trap, and we were all ensnared in Dominic's game. The next morning, I resolved to confront him, to expose his deception and free myself and the others from his control. But I was woefully unprepared for the confrontation that awaited me. Armed with the knowledge of Dominic's deception, I confronted him after the morning gathering. My heart pounded as I demanded answers, the image of the grotesque entity still vivid in my mind. Dominic's reaction was not one of shock or denial, but rather a twisted sense of pride. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Dominic said, his voice steady and cold. "The heart of Elysium Fields. It's more than just a retreat, Mel. It's the birthplace of a new era, an army of the elite, bound by success and luxury. His words sent chills down my spine. He spoke of the entity in the water as a gift, a way to elevate humanity to its true potential. The attendees, once normal people seeking change, were now mere pawns in his grand design. He boasted about how their greed and vanity fed the entity, making it stronger, and in turn, making his followers more devoted. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The attendees weren't just changing mentally, they were transforming into something non-human. Their eyes glinted with a malicious gleam, their smiles too wide, their laughter mocking and cruel. They no longer spoke of dreams or aspirations, but only of wealth, status, and the derision of those they deemed inferior. I watched in horror as Dominic raised his glass of sparkling water, signaling the others to do the same. They drank in unison, their bodies shuddering as the entity's influence took hold. Their voices merged into a cacophony of mockery, belittling and taunting invisible foes. They were no longer the people they once were, they had become extensions of Dominic's will, mindless followers in a cult of sparkling water. The retreat was no longer a safe haven. It was a prison, and I was trapped with no clear way out. Panic set in as I realized the gravity of my situation. I had to escape, but the path to freedom was through a maze of transformed zealots, all under Dominic's control. My escape would be a gamble, but it was a risk I had to take to save myself from a fate worse than death. The escape from Elysium Fields was a terrifying ordeal. I moved stealthily, avoiding the once friendly faces now twisted into grotesque parodies of joy and success. Their mocking laughter and scornful taunts echoed through the halls, a constant reminder of the danger I was in. The retreat had become a labyrinthine trap, with every turn a potential encounter with Dominic's transformed followers. In my frantic escape, I stumbled upon others who, like me, were desperate to flee. We formed a small group, each of us sharing the same horrified realization of the retreat's true nature. Together, we navigated through the estate, using our knowledge of the layout and the cover of night. Our journey was fraught with close calls. Several times we had to hide or take detours as groups of followers roamed the grounds, their conversations a disturbing mix of vanity and greed. The entity had stripped them of their humanity, leaving only a hunger for materialistic validation. As we neared the perimeter of the estate, the reality of our situation sunk in. The entity's influence was powerful, and escaping its grasp would not go unnoticed. Dominic, with his army of followers, would not let us leave easily. Our final obstacle was a heavily guarded gate. It was our only way out, but getting past the guards seemed impossible. In a moment of desperation, we devised a plan to create a distraction, giving us a narrow window to slip through the gate. The plan was risky, but it was our only chance. With our hearts racing, we executed the distraction. The guards were momentarily drawn away, their attention fixated on the commotion we had caused. Seizing the opportunity, we dashed towards the gate, our every step fueled by adrenaline and fear. As we passed through the gate, the chilling sounds of Elysium Fields faded into the night. We had escaped, but the relief was short-lived. The experience had left an indelible mark on us. The world outside seemed different now, tainted by the knowledge of what we had witnessed. The retreat might have been behind us, but its echoes lingered. The obsession with status and luxury was not confined to the walls of Elysium Fields. It was a pervasive force, slowly seeping into the fabric of society. As I looked back at the imposing gates, a haunting thought crossed my mind. The entity's influence was far-reaching, and our escape might have only been the beginning of a much larger battle. The days following my escape from Elysium Fields were a blend of relief and paranoia. The once comforting familiarity of my apartment now felt alien, as if the shadows held secrets I was now painfully aware of. I struggled to reconcile the harrowing experiences at the retreat with the normalcy of my previous life. I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched, of being followed. Every luxury car that passed by, every clink of a glass, brought back memories of the retreat. The world outside hadn't changed, but my perception of it had. The retreat's influence, the entity's insidious grip on greed and vanity, seemed to be everywhere. I started researching, digging into Dominic and Elysium Fields, but my efforts were met with dead ends. It was as if the retreat had vanished into thin air, leaving no trace of its existence. But I knew better. The entity was still out there, possibly spreading, infecting others like it had the attendees. I tried reaching out to the few I escaped with, but it was as if they had disappeared too. I was alone in my knowledge, alone in my fear. The transformation I witnessed at the retreat haunted my dreams, a constant reminder that what I had experienced was just the tip of the iceberg. As days turned into weeks, I realized that the true horror of Elysium Fields wasn't just the entity or the transformation of its followers. It was the realization that society was fertile ground for such an entity to thrive. The obsession with wealth, status, and material possessions was pervasive, and Dominic had merely exploited this existing flaw. I now live with a heightened sense of awareness, seeing the world through a lens tainted by my experiences. The retreat may be gone, but the entity's influence lingers in every corner of society, in every celebration of excessive luxury and superficial success. The story of Elysium Fields remains untold, a dark chapter in my life that most would find unbelievable. But I know the truth. The retreat was real, the danger was real, and the entity is still out there, waiting, thriving in the shadows of human vanity. As I walk the streets, observing the world around me, I can't help but wonder how many others have experienced what I have, how many other Elysium fields exist, hidden in plain sight. The thought is chilling, and I am left with an unsettling certainty. The retreat was just the beginning, and the true horror lies in what is yet to come. The city's cacophony had always been a comforting constant in my life, a symphony of car horns, chattering crowds, and the distant hum of urban machinery. I'm Jacob, a 30-year-old software engineer with an affinity for the more philosophical side of things. But lately, this symphony had started to sound different to me, repetitive, almost scripted. I began to notice peculiar patterns in the people around me, their conversations looping like a broken record, their actions predictably mundane. I remember walking through the park one crisp autumn morning. The leaves were a mosaic of red and gold, and the air carried that cool, inviting nip that heralds the approach of winter. People were out jogging, walking their dogs, lost in their own worlds. But something felt off. A woman passed me, her face buried in her phone, muttering the same sentence over and over. A jogger ran by, his footsteps in unnaturally consistent rhythm. I brushed these observations off as products of my overactive imagination. But the seed of doubt had been planted. As I continued my daily routine, the city and its inhabitants seemed increasingly artificial, like actors on a stage playing their parts for an audience of one me. My curiosity turned into a mild obsession. I started reading more about philosophy, trying to find an explanation for this unsettling sensation. That's when I stumbled upon solipsism, the concept that only one's own mind is sure to exist. The idea resonated with me, offering a potential explanation for the uncanny occurrences I had been witnessing. This led me to an old library in a forgotten corner of the city. The building was a relic, its walls lined with dusty shelves crammed with ancient tomes. In a dimly lit section, tucked away in the back, I found a book so old its title had faded, its pages yellowed with age. It was here that I first read about solipsism in depth, and the book suggested a method to test the reality of one's existence. I should have stopped there, content with the knowledge I had gained. But my curiosity was a ravenous beast, clawing at the corners of my mind, urging me to delve deeper into the rabbit hole. So, I set out to test the reality I had always taken for granted, unaware of the Pandora's box I was about to open. The old book became my guide, its cryptic passages filling my thoughts day and night. It proposed a series of experiments to test the fabric of reality, tests that I, in my growing obsession, was eager to undertake. I started small, making predictions about people's behavior and actions based on the patterns I had observed. To my astonishment, my predictions were often correct. People I had known for years began to seem like hollow shells, their responses and actions eerily predictable. My experiments grew bolder. I would alter my daily route to work or speak random, nonsensical phrases to colleagues, just to see how the world around me would react. The results were always the same. The world adjusted itself seamlessly, as if everything and everyone were part of a program, adapting to maintain the illusion of normality. My friends and family started to notice the change in me. I became distant, my conversations with them shallow and disengaged. How could I relate to them when I was beginning to question their very existence? I saw the hurt in their eyes, the confusion at my cold demeanor, but I couldn't bring myself to explain the truth of my suspicions. How could I, when I wasn't even sure of it myself? One night, after a particularly unsettling day of experiments, I sat alone in my apartment, the book open in front of me. It described a final test, one that would irrevocably prove the nature of reality. It was a risky endeavor, the book warned, with consequences that could not be undone. But by then, my need for the truth had eclipsed all caution. The experiment required a sort of mental hack, a way to tamper with what the book referred to as the code of reality. It was a complex process, involving deep meditation and visualization techniques that would take weeks, if not months, to master. But I was determined. Every night, I would sit in the darkness of my apartment, practicing, pushing my mind to its limits. Finally, after countless hours of preparation, I was ready. I remember the night vividly. The air was still, the city unusually quiet, as if holding its breath. I sat in the center of my living room, the book's instructions etched into my memory, and began the final experiment. The process was intense and disorienting. As I delved deeper into the meditation, the boundaries between my mind and the external world began to blur. I felt as if I were unraveling the very fabric of reality, thread by thread. The sensation was both exhilarating and terrifying. Days turned into weeks, and my perception of the world shifted dramatically. The city around me felt like a mirage, its colors too bright, its sounds too sharp. People seemed like puppets, their strings pulled by an unseen hand. Even the sun in the sky felt like a spotlight in a grand theater, its light artificial. I became reclusive, barely leaving my apartment. My friends and family reached out with concern, but their voices sounded distant, like echoes in a dream. I responded with vague assurances, my mind preoccupied with the experiment. They couldn't understand, how could they? They were part of the illusion I was trying to escape. As I continued the experiment, strange occurrences became commonplace. I would find objects in my apartment moved or missing, as if the world was rearranging itself when I wasn't looking. Time seemed fluid, the night stretching on indefinitely, only to be broken by a sudden dawn. The people I interacted with started repeating phrases, their expressions frozen in a loop. My reality was unraveling, and with it, my sanity. I began to doubt everything. Was I too just a part of this elaborate illusion? The thought haunted me, a specter lurking in the shadows of my mind. But I pressed on, driven by a need for the truth that overshadowed all fear. Then came the night of the final step. The book had described it as a point of no return, and as I sat in the darkness of my apartment, I understood why. I was about to tear through the veil of reality, to glimpse what lay beyond. The air was charged with anticipation, and I felt a surge of adrenaline as I began the final incantation. The world around me trembled, the fabric of reality straining under the weight of my will. And then, with a final push, it tore open. The moment the fabric of reality tore, it was as if the entire world held its breath. A deafening silence enveloped me, and for a moment, everything was still. Then, the illusion shattered. The walls of my apartment dissolved into a void, an endless expanse of emptiness. The city, the people, the sky, all of it peeled away like layers of paint, revealing the stark, unfathomable truth beneath. I stood alone in this void, my heart pounding in my chest. There was nothing, no sound, no light, no ground beneath my feet. Just an infinite emptiness that stretched in all directions. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. I was the only real entity in a world of shadows. Everyone I had ever known, every face, every smile, they were all fabrications, NPCs in a grand simulation. Desperation clawed at my mind. I thought of my parents, their warmth, their laughter. Had it all been a lie? Memories flashed before my eyes, birthdays, holidays, moments of joy and sorrow. They felt real, so vivid and full of emotion. But in this void, they crumbled into nothingness, revealed as mere scripts in a cosmic play. I tried to speak, to call out to anyone or anything that might hear me. But there was no sound in the void, my voice lost to the emptiness. The loneliness was suffocating, a weight so heavy it threatened to crush me. I had sought the truth, but the truth was a nightmare reality where I was utterly, hopelessly alone. In my despair, I recalled the book, its cryptic warnings. There had been no mention of how to return, how to close the tear I had made. I was trapped in this liminal space, a prisoner of my own curiosity. The enormity of what I had done began to sink in. I had unraveled the fabric of my world, and now I was adrift in the consequences. For what felt like an eternity, I floated in the void, my mind teetering on the brink of madness. Then, in the distance, I saw something, a faint glimmer of light. A beacon of hope, or perhaps the final twist in this macabre revelation. With nothing left to lose, I moved toward it, each step an effort in this formless abyss. As I approached the glimmer, it grew brighter, coalescing into a tangible form. It was a door, standing alone in the void, its frame bathed in a soft, inviting light. With a trembling hand, I reached for the handle, my heart a mix of fear and desperation. The door opened to a scene that was both familiar and foreign, my own apartment, but altered, as if seen through a distorted lens. Stepping through the door, I found myself back in the world I had known, but it was changed. The people were still there, moving about their lives, but they were different. Their movements were mechanical, their conversations hollow echoes of human interaction. It was clear to me now they were NPCs, programmed entities in a simulated world. I wandered through the city, a ghost among shadows. I tried to interact with these NPCs, searching for a semblance of the connections I had once cherished. But their responses were empty, devoid of the warmth and complexity of true human interaction. It was like speaking to a well-crafted hologram, a convincing facade with nothing beneath. In this new reality, the loneliness was a constant companion, a reminder of the truth I had uncovered. I longed for the ignorance I had once possessed, the blissful unawareness of the world's true nature. But there was no going back. The experiment had changed everything, and I was left to navigate this hollow existence alone. I searched for a way to undo what I had done, to close the tear I had made in the fabric of reality. But the book offered no answers, its pages silent on the matter of return. I was a man marooned in a sea of artificiality, clinging to the hope of finding a way back to a reality that no longer existed. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. I explored the limits of this new world, testing the boundaries of the simulation. But every discovery only served to deepen my sense of isolation. The world was a canvas, and I was the only real brushstroke upon it. In the end, I accepted my solitary existence in this fabricated world. The search for a way back became a distant memory, replaced by a resigned acceptance of my new reality. I found solace in the small things, the artificial sunrise, the programmed breeze, the NPCs that passed by in their predictable routines. They were echoes of a life I once knew, a life that now seemed like a distant dream. I began to document my experiences, writing a diary of my existence as the sole consciousness in this simulated world. It became my anchor, a way to process the profound loneliness and the surreal nature of my reality. The pages filled with reflections, observations, and philosophical musings. In writing, I found a sense of purpose, a way to make sense of the nonsensical. As time passed, the sharp edges of my despair dulled into a melancholic acceptance. I created routines, interacted with the NPCs, and even found moments of fleeting joy in the simple acts of this artificial life. The world around me was a construct, but it was all I had. Occasionally, I would revisit the door in the void, the portal that stood between realities. It remained closed, a silent testament to my irreversible journey. I wondered if there were others like me, real minds trapped in their own versions of this simulation. The thought was both comforting and terrifying, a shared experience in an isolated existence. The diary grew thick with entries, a testament to my solitary journey. I often pondered the nature of my own existence. Was I, too, just an NPC in someone else's simulation? Was my consciousness real, or just another layer of the illusion? These questions lingered in my mind, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. My story, this record of a lone real entity in a world of shadows, is a paradoxical existence. In the end, I embraced the ambiguity of my situation, finding peace in the unanswered mysteries of my reality. The world around me continued its programmed dance, and I, its lone spectator, learned to find beauty in the artificiality. And so, I leave these words as a testament to my journey, a solitary consciousness in a fabricated world. To whoever finds them, know that in the depths of the unknown, in the heart of the simulation, I found a way to exist. And perhaps, in that existence, there's a sliver of something profoundly real. The house had always been there, standing stoically at the end of a winding gravel path, its walls weathered by time and its windows staring blankly into the dense woods surrounding it. It was a relic left to me by a distant relative, one I barely remembered from my childhood. I'm a solitary figure with a penchant for the forgotten and the arcane. Books were my refuge, and it was perhaps fitting that I inherited this house, with its grand library, that seemed to echo the tales of a bygone era. I remember the day I moved in. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and dust, the kind of smell that settles deep into the fabric of a place, marking it with the passage of time. The house was furnished with antiques, each piece whispering secrets of its past. But it was the bookshelf in the study that captured my attention, the most towering edifice of dark wood, filled with books of every size and color. The books were a patchwork of history, from weathered tomes with cracked spines to more recent, yet still aged, hardcovers. Settling into the house was like stepping into another world, one where the modern bustle seemed distant, almost irrelevant. The first few nights were uneventful, filled with the mundane tasks of arranging my belongings and exploring the nooks and crannies of my new abode. However, it was on the fourth night that I noticed something peculiar. Some of the books on the grand shelf seemed to have shifted slightly from their original positions. I assumed it was the result of my earlier explorations, perhaps a careless brush of my hand as I perused their titles. I meticulously rearranged them, aligning their spines with the precision of a seasoned librarian. That night, as I lay in bed, the house groaned and whispered around me, as if the walls themselves were conversing in hushed tones. I attributed it to the settling of an old structure, my mind rationalizing the eerie course. Sleep eventually claimed me, but it was a restless slumber, filled with dreams of shadowy figures moving silently between rows of endless bookshelves. The next morning brought a chill that seemed to seep into my bones, as I made my way to the study. What I saw on the bookshelf made my breath catch in my throat. The books had rearranged themselves again, but this time there was a clear message spelled out across the shelves. Help me. My initial reaction was disbelief, a skeptical laugh escaping my lips. It had to be a prank, perhaps orchestrated by local kids who'd heard stories about the haunted house in the woods. I studied the message, the letters formed by the alignment of the book spines, a deliberate act, not the random product of chance. Curiosity overcame my skepticism. Who or what was asking for help? And why through such an elaborate method? The message felt like an enigma wrapped in the walls of this ancient home, a puzzle that beckoned me with its silent, cryptic plea. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of an unraveling mystery that would lead me down a path of eerie discoveries and chilling encounters, a journey into the heart of the house's dark past. Over the next few days, the bookshelf became the focus of my world. Each morning, I found new messages. They were simple at first, like luck or sea. I spent hours staring at the books, trying to decipher a deeper meaning, the clue to the identity of this mysterious communicator. Then, one night, as the house creaked in the cold embrace of the wind, a more ominous message appeared. Behind you. I spun around, my heart racing, expecting to confront someone or something lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing, just the empty room bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight spilling through the window. Despite my initial fear, a part of me was fascinated. I was caught in a web of my own curiosity, unable to break free from the spell of these mysterious messages. I started researching the history of the house and its previous inhabitants. The local library became my second home, the librarians my unwitting accomplices in this quest for answers. I learned about the original owner of the house, a reclusive man named Edward Blackwood, known in the early 1900s for his eccentricities and obsession with the occult. Rumors swirled about his dealings with dark magic and forbidden rituals. It was said that he amassed a collection of rare and arcane books, some of which were believed to be cursed. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Could one of these books be on my shelf? As my investigation deepened, so did the strangeness at home. Whispering sounds seemed to emanate from the walls, especially at night. I'd catch glimpses of shadowy figures out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. One evening, as I sat reading in the study, a cold draft swept through the room. The pages of the book I was holding fluttered as if caught in a gust of wind, yet all the windows were closed. When I looked up, my breath caught in my throat. The books on the shelf had rearranged themselves again, forming the most chilling message yet. It watches. I felt a sense of dread wash over me. The playful curiosity that had initially driven me had morphed into a deep, unsettling fear. I was no longer just a passive observer in this hunting. I was a part of it, entangled in its ghostly whispers and shadowy secrets. My sleep became plagued with nightmares, images of unseen eyes staring at me from the darkness, and the feeling of a presence hovering just out of sight. The house, with its creaking floors and whispering walls, seemed to be closing in on me. The line between reality and imagination blurred as I tried to make sense of these paranormal occurrences. Yet, deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore the messages. They were a cry for help, a plea from beyond the veil of reality. And I was the only one who could hear it. As the days passed, the messages on the shelf grew more frequent and urgent. Don't sleep, one warned. Another day, I found the lies spelled out in bold letters. Each message added a layer of anxiety and fear to my already frayed nerves. I began to feel like a prisoner in my own home, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. In my research, I stumbled upon a diary belonging to Edward Blackwood, hidden in a concealed compartment in the study. The diary was filled with ramblings about the occult, dark rituals, and a particular book that he referred to as the key to the other side. This book, it seemed, was the centerpiece of his collection, a tome so dangerous that even he feared its power. The more I read, the more I became convinced that this book was in my house, possibly even on my very bookshelf. I scoured the shelves, looking for anything that matched the description in the diary, but to no avail. It was as if the book didn't want to be found, hiding itself from my desperate search. The paranormal activity in the house escalated alongside my growing obsession. One night, while I was poring over Blackwood's diary, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. My breath turned to mist in the air, and the feeling of being watched intensified. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move, slinking along the wall like a dark, amorphous creature. I turned to face it, my heart pounding in my chest, but it vanished before my eyes. The books on the shelf rustled, as if disturbed by an unseen hand, and a new message appeared. Trapped here. It was then that I started to understand. The entity, whatever it was, wasn't just haunting the house, it was trapped here, bound to the bookshelf, the books, and perhaps even to the cursed home Blackwood had written about. Sleep became an elusive dream. I spent my nights listening to the whispers of the house, trying to piece together the story hidden within its walls. The ghostly apparitions grew bolder, no longer just fleeting shadows, but discernible figures, glimpses of a life that once was. One figure in particular began to stand out, a man, gaunt and pale, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through the veil of death. I knew in my bones that this was Edward Blackwood, his spirit unrested, tethered to the mortal world by his dark obsessions. Each encounter left me more drained, my mind teetering on the edge of sanity. But I couldn't leave. I had to find the cursed book, to free both myself and the trapped soul of Blackwood from this endless haunting. The house, with its ancient secrets and whispered horrors, had become my prison, and I the unwilling warden to its spectral inhabitants. The tension in the house was palpable, like a thick fog that refused to lift. My days and nights blended into a continuous cycle of search and discovery, punctuated by the eerie manifestations of Edward Blackwood's tormented spirit. Each message on the shelf seemed to carry more weight, more urgency, as if time was running out for both of us. Then, on a night when the moon hung low and full, casting a spectral glow over the house, the climax of my haunting experience unfolded. I was in the study, the only light coming from a flickering candle, casting dancing shadows across the walls. The air was colder than usual, and I felt a presence, stronger and more oppressive than ever before. As I turned towards the bookshelf, a new message was forming before my eyes, the books moving with a life of their own. It's here. My heart raced, my breath caught in my throat. I spun around, and there he was, Edward Blackwood, more solid than any apparition I had seen before, his eyes hollow pits of despair. He spoke, his voice a hollow echo. You must find the book, it binds me here, traps us both. His words trailed off into a whisper, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I asked him where to find the book, but he just pointed towards the bookshelf and vanished, leaving me alone in the chilling silence. I approached the shelf, my hands trembling. I pulled book after book from the shelves, searching frantically for the cursed tome. Hours passed, and just as I was about to give up, my fingers brushed against the leather spine that sent a jolt through my body. I pulled it out, and there it was, an ancient book with no title, just a strange symbol on the cover. It emanated a malevolent energy, and I knew instinctively this was the book Blackwood had spoken of. As I held it, the house groaned and shuddered around me, as if reacting to the book's presence. Whispers filled the room, voices overlapping in a cacophony of desperation and madness. The air grew denser, and I struggled to breathe. With every ounce of courage I had left, I opened the book. The pages were filled with indecipherable script and eerie illustrations that seemed to move and twist before my eyes. The room spun, and for a moment, I felt as if I was being pulled into the book itself. Suddenly, the house shook violently, as if in the throes of an earthquake. Books fell from the shelves, and the candle went out, plunging me into darkness. I clutched the cursed tome to my chest, knowing that it was the key to ending this nightmare. When the chaos subsided, I found myself on the floor, the book still in my hands. The oppressive presence of Blackwood's spirit was gone, replaced by a heavy silence. I had found the cursed book, but now I faced a new dilemma: how to rid myself and the house of its malevolent influence. The discovery of the cursed book marked a turning point in my hunting ordeal. Holding the tome, I felt an overwhelming responsibility to resolve the situation, not just for my own safety, but to release Edward Blackwood's tormented spirit from its earthly bonds. The air in the house, though still thick with the remnants of the supernatural, was no longer suffocating. It was as if by acknowledging the book's power, I had taken the first step towards breaking its hold on the house. With a newfound determination, I began researching ways to neutralize the book's curse. My days were consumed with visits to occult experts, historians, and librarians who specialized in ancient texts and supernatural lore. Each person offered a piece of the puzzle, slowly helping me construct a plan to deal with the cursed book. As I delved deeper into the occult practices, I learned about rituals that could cleanse objects of their malevolent energy. However, the more I learned, the more I realized the danger of such undertakings. The rituals were complex and fraught with risk, requiring precision and a deep understanding of the supernatural forces at play. Despite the risks, I knew I had to act. The book's presence continued to cast a shadow over the house, and I could feel the urgency in the stillness of the air, as if the house itself was waiting for me to make my move. One evening, under the light of the full moon, I prepared to conduct a cleansing ritual. I sat up in the study, the cursed book lying open in the center of a circle of salt. Candles flickered at cardinal points around the room, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. I recited the incantations I had learned, each word resonating with power, vibrating through the air. As the ritual progressed, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The air crackled with energy, and the pages of the book began to flutter as if caught in a non-existent breeze. I continued, my voice steady despite the fear that gripped my heart. Suddenly, a gust of wind howled through the room, extinguishing the candles and plunging me into darkness. I felt a surge of energy emanating from the book, a wave of malevolent force that threatened to overwhelm me. But I held my ground, continuing the incantations with a forceful determination. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the tumultuous energy dissipated. The room fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting like a fog at sunrise. I lit a candle and saw that the cursed book was now closed, its cover no longer emanating the sinister aura it once did. The ritual was complete, but I knew my task was not yet finished. The book needed to be kept safe, away from those who might unwittingly unleash its curse again. I decided to leave the house, taking the book with me to find a suitable place for safekeeping. The drive away from the house was surreal. The events of the past weeks felt like a distant dream, yet the book lying on the passenger seat was a tangible reminder of the reality I had experienced. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a shadowy figure or a cryptic message, but there was only the road behind me, stretching away into the night. Leaving the house behind, I drove through the night, the cursed book beside me, wrapped in a cloth to obscure its malevolent aura. The day I found the piano was like any other Saturday, rummaging through neighborhood garage sales looking for forgotten treasures. But this particular find was different. Nestled among the usual array of discarded items was an old, ornate piano. It looked out of place with its intricately carved legs and faded keys, a relic from a bygone era. Its presence seemed to cast a shadow over the other mundane objects. I remember the seller, an elderly woman whose eyes flickered with a mix of relief and unease as she saw my interest in it. She told me it was a family heirloom, but her eagerness to part with it struck me as odd. There was an unspoken urgency in her voice, a desire to get rid of it as quickly as possible. Despite the piano's eerie aura, or perhaps because of it, I was drawn to it. I felt a connection, an unexplainable pull. As the piano was loaded onto my dad's truck, the old woman leaned in close and whispered, almost inaudibly, "Be careful with that thing. It's old, and it has a history." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, but my curiosity was piqued even more. Back home, the piano took its place in our living room, its aged wood and faded ivory keys, adding a touch of mystery to our otherwise modern decor. I sat down in front of it, my fingers hovering over the keys with a sense of reverence. I had never been particularly musically inclined, but something about this piano made me feel like I could play. The first note I struck resonated through the room, it sounded clearer and more beautiful than I could have imagined. The melody that followed seemed to flow from the piano itself, guiding my hands. The music was haunting, almost otherworldly. It filled the room, and for a moment, I lost myself in it. That night, I lay in bed, the piano's melody replaying in my head. It was mesmerizing, enchanting, but there was something else, a feeling I couldn't quite place. It was as if the music had awakened something, a feeling of anticipation, like the calm before a storm. The next morning, the neighborhood was abuzz with unsettling news. Mr. Henderson, the elderly man who lived a few doors down, had vanished without a trace. No one saw him leave, and his house was left untouched. It was as if he had simply ceased to exist. As the news of Mr. Henderson's disappearance spread, a sense of unease settled over the neighborhood. But for me, the unease was accompanied by a nagging suspicion, a connection to the haunting melody I had played the night before. It was a ridiculous thought, yet I couldn't shake it. The piano, with its mysterious past and the old woman's cryptic warning, seemed to loom larger in my mind. Unbeknownst to me, this was just the beginning. The melody I had released was more than just a tune. It was a harbinger of something dark and inexplicable. And as I would soon discover, playing that old piano had set in motion a series of events that would change everything. In the days that followed Mr. Henderson's disappearance, I found myself inexplicably drawn back to the piano. Each time I played, the melodies seemed to become more complex, more captivating. It was as if the piano had a life of its own, its keys whispering secrets from ages past. The music wasn't just heard, it was felt, resonating deep within me. Then, another disappearance. 2 days after Mr. Henderson, it was Mrs. Collins, the kind librarian who lived at the corner of our street. Like Mr. Henderson, she vanished without a trace, her house eerily silent and untouched. The neighborhood was in a state of quiet panic now, the air thick with unspoken fears and suspicions. I should have seen the pattern then, but I was too caught up in the music, the power I felt coursing through me as I played. It was an addiction, the piano calling to me, its melodies echoing in my mind even in the silence of the night. It wasn't until the third disappearance, a week after I brought the piano home, that the chilling realization hit me. It was young Timmy, barely 12, known for his bright smile, and the way he zipped around the neighborhood on his skateboard. The news sent a cold jolt of fear through me. This was no coincidence. There was something horribly wrong, and it was connected to the piano. I started to research, poring over old newspaper clippings and internet articles, searching for anything related to the piano or its previous owners. The task was daunting, but I was driven by a growing sense of dread. What I found only deepened the mystery. Every previous owner of the piano had a tragic story. Accidents, unexplained disappearances, even rumors of madness. The piano seemed to leave a trail of sorrow and darkness wherever it went. But the most disturbing discovery was a series of old diary entries I found hidden in the piano bench. They belonged to a young girl who owned a piano in the early 1900s. Her words were frantic, filled with fear. She wrote of the piano's power, how it demanded to be played, and the terrible things that happened when it was. The diary entries ended abruptly, but her last words stayed with me. The piano must not play. Its melodies are not of this world. They call to them, the ones who listen, and they vanish into the shadow of his song. I was terrified. I had unleashed something beyond my understanding, something ancient and malevolent. The piano wasn't just an instrument, it was a catalyst, a gateway to something dark and unknown. And I had opened that gateway. As I sat there, staring at the piano, a chilling thought occurred to me. The piano had been silent since the last disappearance. But what would happen when it played again? Who would be the next to vanish into the shadow of his song? The weight of my actions pressed down on me, a burden I could no longer ignore. I had to find a way to stop it, to silence the piano before it claimed another soul. The urgency to understand and stop the piano's ominous power consumed me. I began to observe a frightening pattern. The piano seemed to play itself, emitting faint melodies late at night, as if calling out to someone, or something. Each time it played, another person would vanish. The link was undeniable now. I started to avoid the piano, but the music haunted me. It played in my dreams, an endless eerie symphony that left me waking up in cold sweats. The neighborhood was now gripped with fear. People whispered about a curse, about ghosts. Some even talked about leaving. And amidst it all, the piano sat in our living room, silent and brooding, like a dark sentinel watching over us. Determined to break this cycle of vanishings, I dove deeper into the piano's history. I spent hours at the local library, searching through old records and newspapers. It was there I met Mrs. Wallace, an elderly historian with a wealth of knowledge about the town's past. She listened intently as I told her about the piano and the disappearances. The vanishing melody, she murmured, her eyes clouded with a mix of fear and recognition. I thought it was just a legend, a ghost story to scare children. But you say this piano is real. Together, we unearthed a chilling legend. The piano, known as the Vanishing Melody, was said to be cursed by its creator, a tormented musician who infused his anguish and despair into the instrument. According to the legend, the piano housed a malevolent entity that fed on the souls of those who heard its music. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but knowledge alone wasn't enough. I needed to find a way to stop the piano, to end the curse. Mrs. Wallace suggested that the original creator might have left clues on how to break the curse within the piano itself. I examined the piano meticulously, discovering hidden compartments and cryptic engravings that alluded to a ritual, a way to appease the entity within and break the curse. The ritual required a piece of the piano, a personal item from each vanished person, and a melody to bind them. The task was daunting. How was I to find personal items of the vanished? It felt like an impossible quest, but driven by a sense of responsibility for the chaos I had unleashed, I started my search. I visited the homes of the vanished, each visit a painful reminder of the lives disrupted by the piano's melody. I found Mr. Henderson's old pocket watch, Mrs. Collins' favorite book, and, most heartbreakingly, Tommy's cherished skateboard. With each item, the weight of my task grew heavier. The final piece of the ritual was the melody. I had to play the piano one last time, a thought that filled me with dread. The idea of once again releasing its haunting music into the world terrified me, but I knew it was the only way to end the curse. With the items gathered and the ritual prepared, I sat at the piano, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was silent, the air thick with anticipation. I placed the items around me, took a deep breath, and began to play. The melody that flowed from my fingers was unlike any I had played before. It was a song of sorrow and hope, a plea for forgiveness and release. The piano responded, its keys moving with a life of their own, the music filling the room, enveloping everything in its haunting embrace. As the final note hung in the air, the world seemed to hold its breath. And then, something extraordinary happened. The piano's dark aura lifted, the oppressive atmosphere dissipating like mist in the morning sun. For the first time since I brought the piano home, I felt a sense of peace. But the ritual was not without its consequences. The piano, now silent, was forever changed. The entity within it was appeased, but not destroyed. The threat was gone, but the memory of what had happened, the people who had vanished, would always linger. I knew then that the piano could never remain in our home. It had to be taken somewhere safe, somewhere it could do no more harm. The mystery of the vanishing melody would remain, a haunting tune echoing in the annals of our town's history. The piano was taken away, but the memory of its dark melody, and the lives it touched, would never fade. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, but the shadow of the piano's curse lingered. We were all left with a deeper understanding of the unknown, a respect for the mysteries that lie just beyond our perception. And as for me, I learned a valuable lesson about curiosity and the dangers of unearthing the past. Some melodies are better left unsung, some secrets better left undiscovered. But the echoes of the vanishing melody would forever haunt my dreams, a reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. In the aftermath of the ritual, the neighborhood slowly began to recover, but the shadow of the events lingered. People spoke in hushed tones about the disappearances and the mysterious piano. I felt a heavy burden of guilt. Though I had stopped the curse, I couldn't bring back those who had vanished. I continued to collaborate with Mrs. Wallace, seeking to understand more about the entity within the piano, and ensuring it could never harm anyone again. We pored over old texts and obscure references, piecing together the puzzle of the piano's dark history. It became clear that the entity was not entirely gone, it was merely dormant, its power diminished but not destroyed. The realization that the piano could never be played again weighed heavily on me. Its presence in our home became unbearable, a constant reminder of the sorrow it had caused. I knew it had to be removed, to be placed somewhere it could never be played again. Mrs. Wallace helped me find a solution. A museum dedicated to paranormal artifacts agreed to take the piano. They understood the need to preserve and protect such items, ensuring they couldn't cause harm. The day the piano was taken away was bittersweet. I felt a sense of relief, but also a profound sadness for the lost souls and the unanswerable questions they left behind. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. But the memory of the vanished lingered, their absence a silent testament to the piano's curse. I visited their families, offering my condolences and support. The guilt and responsibility I felt were overwhelming, but I knew I had to face them, to acknowledge the part I had played in their loss. I kept in touch with Mrs. Wallace, who became a mentor and friend. She helped me navigate the complex emotions and the lingering fear that the curse might one day return. Together, we ensured that the piano's history was documented, a warning for future generations about the dangers of unearthing the past. As for me, I found a newfound respect for the unknown, a cautious approach to the mysteries that surround us. The experience with the piano had changed me, opened my eyes to the thin veil between our world and the unseen forces that lie just beyond our understanding. The story of the vanishing melody became a local legend, whispered about in the dim light of fireplaces and during quiet neighborhood gatherings. People spoke of the haunted piano and the brave girl who had stopped its curse, but I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a survivor, someone who had unwittingly unleashed the darkness and managed to contain it, albeit at a great cost. The piano's absence left a void in our home, but it was a necessary emptiness. I sometimes found myself listening for its melody, a haunting tune that lingered in the back of my mind. But there was only silence, a silence that was both comforting and eerie. I often wondered about the vanished, where they had gone, and if they were at peace. The not knowing was the hardest part, the unanswered questions that haunted my dreams. I hoped that wherever they were, they knew I had tried to right my wrongs, to bring closure to the pain the piano had caused. The piano itself remained in the museum, an object of curiosity and fear. I visited it once, a few years later. It sat in a dimly lit room, silent and imposing. I felt a chill as I approached it, a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. But there was also a sense of closure, a feeling that the story had ended, at least for now. As I left the museum, I looked back at the piano one last time. It was just an object, wood and strings and ivory, but it held a power that was beyond understanding. A power that was now contained, but never truly gone. The vanishing melody was a reminder of the thin line between curiosity and recklessness, a tale of a melody that should never have been played. But it was also a story of redemption, of facing one's fears and taking responsibility for one's actions. In the end, the piano was gone, but its legacy lived on. In the quiet of the night, when the world was still, I could almost hear its music, a faint distant melody that was both beautiful and terrifying. A reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved, some secrets better left hidden in the shadows. I walked away from the museum that day with a heavy heart, the echo of the piano's haunting melody, a faint whisper in my mind. The experience had changed me, marked me in ways I was still trying to understand. I had faced something otherworldly, something that defied explanation, and had come out the other side. In the years that followed, I became somewhat of a local legend. People would sometimes stop me on the street, their eyes wide with curiosity, and ask about the piano, about what really happened. I would offer them a small smile, a nod, but I kept the truth close to my heart. It was a burden I carried alone, a secret that was mine to keep. Life moved on, as it always does. The neighborhood healed, the memories of the vanished slowly fading into the background of everyday life. But for those of us who had been touched by the piano's curse, the scars remained. We shared an unspoken bond, a collective memory of the darkness that had once lurked among us. I often thought about the vanished, about their last moments before they were consumed by the piano's melody. In my mind, they were not just names in a newspaper article, they were real people, with hopes and dreams and stories left unfinished. I wondered if they had found peace, or if they were still trapped somewhere, lost in the shadow of the melody. The piano remained a mystery, its origins and true nature a puzzle that might never be solved. I accepted that some questions were destined to remain unanswered, that some mysteries were beyond the reach of human understanding. The piano was a reminder of the vast, unexplored territories that exist just beyond the edges of our reality, a testament to the mysteries that lurk in the shadows. As I grew older, I found solace in the mundane, the simple joys of life. I took comfort in the laughter of friends, the warmth of the sun on my face, the beauty of a world that was, for the most part, predictable and safe. But there was always a part of me that looked over my shoulder, that listened for the faint echo of a melody that might never come. The vanishing melody was more than just a story, it was a part of me, a chapter in my life that I would never forget. It was a tale of curiosity, of darkness and light, of the thin line between the known and the unknown. It was a reminder that we are all just small pieces in a much larger puzzle, a puzzle that is vast and mysterious and endlessly fascinating. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is asleep and the air is still, I can hear it, a faint, haunting melody, drifting on the edge of my consciousness. A reminder of the piano, of the lives it touched, and of the mysteries that are always there, just out of sight, waiting to be discovered. In the end, the vanishing melody was not just a story about a haunted piano. It was a story about us, about our innate desire to explore the unknown, to understand the mysteries that surround us. It was a story about the human spirit, about our ability to face the darkness and find the light. And it was a story that would live on, a melody that would never truly fade, echoing through the ages as a haunting, beautiful reminder of the mysteries that lie just beyond our reach. I always believed that starting anew in a different place could magically transform one's life. That's what I hoped for when I moved into my new apartment, a quaint, affordable space in a modest part of the city. It was my escape, my fresh start as a young graphic designer trying to make a mark in the world. The apartment was surprisingly well kept for its price, furnished with a minimalist touch. But what caught my eye was an ornate painting in the living room. It was large, almost covering the entire wall, depicting a serene landscape, a lush meadow under a twilight sky, a solitary tree in the center, and a distant, blurred figure that seemed lost in the vastness. There was something mesmerizing about that painting. I often found myself staring at it, lost in the intricacies of its brushstrokes. The landlord, a middle-aged man with a forgettable face, had briefly mentioned it during my move-in. "It's part of the apartment," he had said, a flicker of something indecipherable in his eyes. "It's better not to tamper with it." I didn't mind. The painting added a certain character to the place, a touch of elegance amidst the otherwise mundane setting. In the first few days, I settled in, arranging my belongings, making the space mine. I worked from home, so the living room doubled as my studio. The painting became a backdrop to my daily life, a silent observer of my new beginning. But as days turned into weeks, a subtle sense of unease began to creep in. It started with a nagging feeling, a sense that something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. It was during one lazy evening, as I sat sketching on my couch, that I noticed that something about the painting was different. The tree's branches, which I remembered fanning outwards, now seemed to reach upwards, as if stretching towards the darkening sky. and the figure, once a mere smudge in the distance, now appeared slightly more defined, slightly closer. At first, I brushed it off as a trick of the light or a quirk of my imagination. But as the days passed, the changes became more pronounced, more difficult to ignore. I began to document the painting's daily transformations, taking photos from the same angle at the same time every day. My friends said I was imagining things, but the photos didn't lie. Each day, the painting shifted, evolved. The serene landscape gradually darkened, the twilight sky turning to an ominous hue. The lone tree's branches twisted into grotesque shapes. And the figure, oh, the figure. Each day it drew closer, its features becoming clear, more disturbing. It was no longer a mere shadow in the background, but a gaunt, ghostly presence with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through the canvas, staring directly at me. I couldn't explain it, but a chilling realization dawned on me: the painting wasn't just changing, it was alive. And whatever resided within it was now aware of me. As the days slipped by, my fascination with the painting turned into a consuming obsession. I couldn't help but feel that the changes in the painting were not just random alterations, they were deliberate, purposeful. The more it transformed, the more the atmosphere in my apartment shifted. It was as if the walls themselves were breathing, pulsating with a life of their own. The strange occurrences began subtly at first. I would wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of whispers, soft and unintelligible, as if someone was speaking just out of earshot. I searched my apartment multiple times, but I never found anything. Then, there were the small, inexplicable happenings. Objects slightly moved from where I left them, doors creaking open when I was certain I had closed them, a constant feeling of being watched. The air felt heavier, charged with an unseen presence. My nights became restless, plagued with nightmares. I dreamt of the figure in the painting, its gaunt face haunting my sleep. In my dreams, it whispered secrets in a language I couldn't understand, its hollow eyes boring into mine. During the day, I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept drifting back to the painting. I started researching its history, digging through old records and online forums, hoping to find anything that could explain what was happening. That's when I stumbled upon the stories of the previous tenants. There were forums filled with discussions about the apartment and its peculiar painting. Many had experienced similar phenomena: the changes in the painting, the eerie occurrences. Some spoke of a curse, others of a haunted artifact. A few tenants had disappeared without a trace, leaving all their belongings behind. With each story I read, my unease grew. The figure in the painting, now almost entirely discernible, was an emaciated entity with skin stretched taut over its bones. Its eyes were dark voids, and its mouth, a thin, sinister line, seemed to twist into a grotesque semblance of a smile whenever I looked away. The realization that I was not alone, that others had suffered the same terror, did little to comfort me. If anything, it only deepened my fear. What had I gotten myself into? And more importantly, how could I escape it? I knew I had to find answers, but part of me dreaded what those answers might reveal. The painting, once a beautiful piece of art, had become a source of nightmares, a window into a world I never wanted to be a part of. And yet, I couldn't tear my eyes away from it, as if it held me under a spell. As the figure in the painting continued its sinister evolution, I couldn't shake off the feeling that it wasn't just changing, it was coming for me. The days blurred together, each one feeding into the next with an unrelenting sense of dread. The painting, my once cherished piece of art, had become a nightmarish tableau. The landscape it depicted was now shrouded in perpetual twilight, the colors bleak and distorted, as if the scene was rotting from within. But it was the figure in the painting that terrified me the most. It had become alarmingly clear, a skeletal entity draped in tattered robes, its face a hollow mockery of humanity. Those eyes, dark and endless, seemed to follow me, observing my every move with a malevolent gaze. The apartment itself felt different, colder, oppressive, as if the air itself was thickening, becoming harder to breathe. Whispers filled the nights, and shadows danced in the corners of my vision, always just out of sight. I tried to leave, to stay with a friend for a few nights, but something always stopped me. It was as if an invisible barrier held me within the confines of the apartment, a prisoner to the painting's will. One evening, as I lay in bed, trying to find sleep that never came, I heard a new sound, a low, guttural moaning, that seemed to emanate from the painting itself. I rose from my bed, drawn to it despite every instinct screaming inside me to run away. As I stood before it, the figure in the painting began to move, its limbs jerking in unnatural, spasmodic motions. I watched, frozen in horror, as it raised a hand and pressed it against the canvas, distorting the painted reality around it. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing for an explanation, any rational thought to cling to. But rationality had long since fled, leaving me alone with the creeping madness that had taken its place. I spent the following days in a haze of fear and confusion, barely eating, barely sleeping. The painting was consuming me, its presence an ever-growing malignancy that I could neither escape nor understand. I scoured the internet for any information on the artist, hoping to find a clue, a reason behind the painting's curse. But all I found were dead ends and more tales of woe from former tenants. No one knew who had created the painting, or why it inflicted such terror on those who lived with it. As the entity in the painting continued to manifest, the line between reality and nightmare blurred. The apartment became a reflection of the painting's twisted landscape. The walls seemed to pulse and shift, the air heavy with the stench of decay. I knew I was losing myself, my grip on reality slipping further away with each passing day. But I also knew I couldn't give in, that I had to find a way to break free from the painting's hold. In my desperation, I reached out to local paranormal experts, hoping they could offer some assistance, some way to rid myself of the painting's curse. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was alone in this fight, facing an enemy that defied all logic and reason. And as I stood there, staring into the abyssal eyes of the figure in the painting, I realized the horrifying truth: it wasn't just a painting. It was a portal, and whatever resided within it was coming for me. The night it happened, the night the figure left the painting, is etched into my memory like a scar. I remember waking up, a cold sweat clinging to my skin, the air thick with an electrifying sense of dread. My eyes were drawn to the painting, as they had been countless times before. But this time, it was different. The figure, the ghastly specter that had haunted me for weeks, was gone. Panic surged through me, a primal, icy fear. I scrambled out of bed, my eyes darting around the dimly lit room. The apartment was silent, save for the pounding of my heart in my ears. Then, I noticed a subtle shift in the shadows, a distortion in the air, as if the painting's cursed landscape was seeping into my reality. I rushed to my phone, frantically scrolling through the photos I had taken of the painting. My breath caught in my throat as I saw it, the figure, now present in the background of each photo, getting progressively closer with each snapshot. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The entity hadn't just left the painting, it had entered my world, my reality. The apartment, I felt trapped, a mouse in a maze constructed by a malevolent force beyond my comprehension. The once familiar halls of my apartment twisted into unfamiliar, menacing corridors. The air was heavy with a palpable sense of malice, the walls seeming to close in around me. I stumbled through the apartment, my mind racing, trying to find a way out, a way to escape the nightmare that had enveloped me. But every turn only led me deeper into the twisted reality, the entity's presence looming over me, a constant, oppressive force. I heard it then, a low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Words formed in the darkness, a language I couldn't understand but felt in my very soul a message of despair and torment. In my desperation, I remembered the words of the landlord, the fleeting look of fear in his eyes when he spoke of the painting. It's better not to tamper with it. Those words echoed in my mind, a clue, perhaps, to ending this nightmare. With trembling hands, I approached the painting, or rather, where the painting used to be. The canvas was now a gaping maw of darkness, a portal that had unleashed this horror upon me. I knew what I had to do. I had to destroy the painting, close the portal, and banish the entity back to whatever hellish realm it had come from. Gathering every ounce of courage I had left, I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy bookend, and hurled it at the canvas. The impact tore through the fabric of the painting, a tear in the very fabric of reality. The apartment convulsed around me, the walls warping, the air screaming with the entity's rage. But I didn't stop. I grabbed anything I could, smashing and tearing at the canvas, each strike a blow against the nightmare that had consumed my life. As the painting shredded under my assault, the entity's presence began to wane, its whispers turning into anguished howls. The apartment shuddered, the twisted reality it had created collapsing in on itself. And then, with a final desperate effort, I set the remains of the painting on fire. The flames consumed the cursed canvas, the light banishing the darkness that had enveloped me. As the fire burned, the apartment began to settle, the air clearing, the oppressive presence fading away. I collapsed to the floor, exhaustion and relief washing over me in equal measure. The nightmare was over. The painting, the portal, the entity, all were gone, reduced to ashes in the purifying flames. I had won, but at what cost? My sanity, my sense of reality, had been shaken to its core. But I was alive. I was free. And in that moment, that was all that mattered. The morning after the confrontation was surreal. The sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm, comforting glow over the apartment. It was hard to believe that just hours ago, this same space had been a nightmarish hellscape, controlled by an entity from a cursed painting. I moved through the apartment with a sense of disbelief. The walls were solid and unmoving, the air was clear, and the oppressive presence that had haunted me was gone. The remains of the painting were nothing but charred ashes in a scorched frame. I felt a profound sense of relief, but it was tinged with an undercurrent of fear. What I had experienced was beyond the realm of understanding, a brush with a darkness that defied explanation. I knew I couldn't stay in the apartment any longer. The memories, the fear, it was all too raw, too real. Packing my belongings was a blur. I moved mechanically, my mind still grappling with the events of the previous night. The landlord didn't ask any questions when I handed him the keys, just a nod and a glance that told me he knew more than he had ever let on. I left the apartment with one last look, a silent goodbye to a chapter of my life I hoped to never revisit. The experience had changed me in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. In the weeks that followed, I stayed with a friend, trying to piece my life back together. The memories of the painting, the entity, and the twisted reality it had created haunted my dreams. But with each passing day, the terror faded a little more, becoming a distant nightmare. I began to research more about the paranormal, about portals and entities from other realms. I needed to understand what had happened, to find some logic in the chaos. But the more I learned, the more I realized how little we know, how thin the veil is between our world and the unknown. The apartment was renovated and put back on the market, a fresh coat of paint hiding the scars of its past. I followed the listing online, a morbid curiosity to see if anyone would dare live there after what had happened. Then, one day, the listing was removed. Someone new had moved in, oblivious to the apartment's dark history. I felt a pang of fear for them, a hope that the entity was truly gone and not just lying dormant, waiting for its next victim. The final scene of this chapter of my life played out in my mind like a movie. The landlord, walking through the renovated apartment with a new tenant, their steps echoing in the empty space. And there, in the living room, a new painting hung on the wall. It was different, yet hauntingly familiar. In the background, barely visible, was the faint outline of a figure, a ghostly echo of the past. The cycle had been broken, but the mystery remained. The painting, the entity, the experiences, they were all part of a larger puzzle, a glimpse into the unknown that surrounds us, hidden in plain sight. As I settled into a new chapter of my life, away from the cursed apartment and its haunting painting, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't entirely over. The experience had left a deep imprint on me, an indelible mark that colored my perception of the world. The new apartment I moved into was bright and airy, a stark contrast to the dim, oppressive atmosphere of my previous residence. I decorated the walls with cheerful prints and vibrant colors, consciously avoiding anything that resembled the haunting landscape of the cursed painting. Despite the fresh start, the shadows of the past lingered. I often found myself waking up in the middle of the night, heart racing, expecting to see the twisted figure from the painting standing in the shadows. Each creak of the floorboards, each flicker of the lights, sent a jolt of fear through me. I knew I needed closure, something to assure me that the nightmare was truly over. I started seeing a therapist, talking through my experiences, trying to make sense of the senseless. It helped, grounding me in reality, reminding me that the entity and the painting were gone, destroyed by my own hand. But deep down, there was a niggling doubt, a question that remained unanswered. Had I really banished the entity, or had I simply closed a door that could be reopened? The thought haunted me, a whisper in the back of my mind. I immersed myself in work and social activities, filling my days with distractions. Yet, in the quiet moments, in the stillness of the night, the memories crept back in. The entity's hollow eyes, the twisted landscape, the feeling of being trapped in a living nightmare, they were etched in my memory, as vivid as ever. I kept an eye on the news, half expecting to hear about strange occurrences or disappearances linked to the apartment. But there was nothing, just the mundane flow of everyday life. It was both a relief and a source of anxiety. The lack of news didn't prove the entity was gone, it just meant it hadn't shown itself. Months passed, and the intensity of my memories began to fade, the edges blurring into the background of my mind. Yet, the sense of unease never fully disappeared. It was like living with a shadow, a constant reminder of the darkness that existed just beyond the veil of our understanding. The story of the cursed painting and the entity became a part of me, a dark chapter in the story of my life. It was a reminder that the world is full of mysteries, some beautiful, some terrifying. I had faced one of those mysteries and come out the other side, but the experience had changed me, opened my eyes to the unknown that lurks in the corners of our reality. As I moved forward, I carried the lessons of that experience with me. I learned to appreciate the light, the normalcy of everyday life, knowing that darkness could be just around the corner. And in the back of my mind, a quiet resolve formed to never forget, to stay vigilant, and to respect the mysteries of the world, for we never know when they might reach out and touch our lives again. The neighborhood where I lived was the kind that featured in feel-good movies. Houses with manicured lawns, friendly neighbors who knew each other's names, and children's laughter echoing through the streets. It was picturesque, almost unnervingly so. But there was an oddity, a peculiarity that everyone seemed to overlook, or maybe they chose to ignore it. It was the ice cream truck. Every Friday evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the familiar jingle of the ice cream truck would meander through our streets. It was an old, slightly rusted vehicle, with paint peeling off in places. The tune it played was cheerful, yet there was something about it that I could never put my finger on. Something unsettling. I was a curious teenager with an affinity for puzzles and mysteries. This particular enigma had always intrigued me. I noticed that nobody, not even myself, could remember the tune once the truck turned the corner and left our street. It was as if the melody slipped through our minds like water through fingers, leaving no trace behind. One day, sitting on my front porch with my friends Sam and Riley, I brought it up. "Have you guys ever noticed that you can't remember the ice cream truck's tune?" I asked, watching their faces. Sam, always the skeptic, laughed it off at first, but then his expression changed as he tried and failed to recall the melody. Riley, quieter but observant, nodded in agreement, her brow furrowed in thought. "It's weird, right?" I continued, my curiosity piqued. "I mean, how can a tune we've heard countless times just vanish from our memory?" The three of us sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of this anomaly settling in. It was then that we decided to investigate, to unravel this small mystery of our otherwise ordinary neighborhood. We made a plan to record the tune the following Friday, unaware of the strange path this investigation would lead us down. Little did we know, this was just the beginning of a series of events that would shroud our neighborhood in a veil of mystery and unease. The week dragged by with the slow crawl of anticipation. I couldn't shake off the feeling of being on the cusp of uncovering something significant. Sam and Riley were equally engrossed in the mystery, and we spent the week discussing theories and possibilities. Finally, Friday arrived, and with it, a sense of nervous excitement. We gathered near my house, each of us armed with a recording device, a phone, a digital recorder, and even an old tape recorder that Riley had found in her attic. We waited, the evening air filled with the distant sounds of children playing, and the occasional bark of a neighborhood dog. Then, as the sky began to turn a dusky purple, we heard the faint, jolly jingle of the ice cream truck approaching. The truck turned onto our street, its familiar, slightly haunting melody growing louder. I pressed record on my phone, a sense of triumph rising in me. But as the truck drew near, my phone screen flickered and went black. I stared at it in disbelief, pressing buttons frantically. "It's not working," I said, my voice tinged with frustration. Sam, next to me, was having similar issues. "Mine too," he said, shaking his digital recorder as if that would fix it. Riley, looking equally perplexed, held up her tape recorder, its reel spinning uselessly, recording nothing. "It's like the tune is unrecordable," Riley murmured, her voice laced with a mix of awe and apprehension. The truck passed by us, the driver, a shadowy figure barely visible through the tinted window, seemingly oblivious to our attempts. As it turned the corner, the tune faded, and once again, we were left with no tangible memory of it. In the days that followed, we tried various methods to capture the tune, but each attempt was met with inexplicable interruptions or technical malfunctions. Our frustration grew, but so did our determination. I began to notice other odd occurrences around the neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson's cat, usually so placid, hissed and spat at unseen things. Mr. Thompson, who had lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone, seemed unusually forgetful, often wandering the streets with a bewildered expression. The air in the neighborhood felt charged, heavy with an unspoken tension. It was as if the very atmosphere was being influenced by the elusive tune of the ice cream truck. I couldn't help but feel that we were on the brink of uncovering something far more profound and unsettling than any of us had imagined. The mystery of the ice cream truck's tune began to consume my thoughts. It wasn't just the melody that was unmemorable, it was as if the tune itself had a power, an influence that extended beyond mere forgetfulness. Sam, Riley, and I spent hours discussing it, our conversations veering between logical explanations and wild speculations. As the days passed, the neighborhood's oddities grew more pronounced. Pets behaved erratically, their owners increasingly agitated. The once friendly chats between neighbors dwindled, replaced by hushed, anxious whispers. Each Friday, we continued our attempts to capture the tune, but to no avail. It was as if the truck was cloaked in an invisible shield that thwarted all our efforts. The frustration was maddening. More disturbingly, I began to feel watched, as if unseen eyes were observing our every move. One afternoon, as I walked home from school, I noticed something peculiar. The neighborhood, usually bustling with activity, was eerily quiet. The silence was oppressive, unnatural. As I passed the Johnson's house, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. Mr. Johnson was standing in his front yard, staring blankly at his house. His expression was one of confusion and fear, as if he no longer recognized his own home. Riley and Sam had similar stories. People forgetting where they lived, wandering the streets as if lost in their own neighborhood. And always, the sense of something lurking just out of sight, a presence that we couldn't quite identify. Our focus shifted from merely recording the tune to understanding its influence on our neighborhood. We started documenting everything, every odd behavior, every strange occurrence. We were no longer dealing with a simple mystery, this was something bigger, something darker. The climax of our investigation came unexpectedly. It was a Friday like any other, the ice cream truck making its usual rounds. We had given up on trying to record the tune, our efforts now focused on observing the truck and its driver. As the truck approached, the tune playing as cheerfully as ever, something within me snapped. I needed answers. Without thinking, I stepped off the curb and walked towards the truck. Sam and Riley called after me, but their voices seemed distant, muffled by the overpowering melody. The driver noticed me approaching and slowed to a stop. He was an old man, his skin ashen, with deep-set eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. His smile was unsettling, too wide, revealing a row of yellow teeth. "I need to know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What is this tune? What are you doing to our neighborhood?" His smile widened, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something dark and malevolent in his eyes. He beckoned me closer with a gnarled finger. "Would you like to see inside?" he asked, his voice a raspy whisper. The back of the truck was open, revealing the interior. Instead of the usual array of ice creams and popsicles, there were containers labeled with names I didn't recognize. Names that evoked feelings of dread and unease. As I peered inside, the tune enveloped me, louder and more insistent. It was as if the melody itself was alive, wrapping around my mind, seeping into my very being. I felt dizzy, disoriented, as if the world around me was spinning out of control. Riley and Sam grabbed me, pulling me back from the edge of an abyss I hadn't even realized I was teetering on. We stumbled away from the truck, the melody still echoing in our ears, a haunting refrain that refused to be silenced. The encounter with the ice cream truck and its enigmatic driver left us shaking. As we retreated from the truck, the melody still reverberating in our minds, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The familiar streets of our neighborhood felt foreign, as if we had stepped into an alternate reality where nothing quite made sense. In the days following, the impact of that haunting tune became increasingly apparent. The neighborhood was unraveling, its once serene atmosphere now laced with an undercurrent of madness. People wandered the streets at all hours, their expressions vacant, as if they were searching for something they couldn't quite remember. I found myself plagued by nightmares, each more vivid and unsettling than the last. I would wake in the dead of night, drenched in sweat, the remnants of the tune playing in the back of my mind like a sinister lullaby. Sam and Riley confessed to similar experiences, their once skeptical attitudes replaced by a growing sense of dread. We realized that the tune wasn't just unmemorable, it was like a virus, infecting our thoughts, eroding our sense of reality. The more we tried to understand it, the more it seemed to slip away, leaving in its wake a trail of confusion and fear. Our investigation, once driven by curiosity, had become a desperate search for answers. We scoured old newspapers, interviewed longtime residents, and even tried to track down previous owners of the ice cream truck, but every lead ended in a dead end. It was as if the truck and its mysterious tune existed outside of time and reality, untouched by the normal rules of existence. The neighborhood's decline accelerated. People's behavior grew more erratic, their memories increasingly fragmented. It was as if the tune was erasing parts of themselves, leaving hollow shells where once there had been vibrant individuals. In a final, desperate attempt to find answers, we decided to confront the driver again. We waited for the truck on a Friday evening, our resolve steeling us against the fear that gnawed at our insides. But the truck never came. Instead, the neighborhood fell into a deep, unnatural silence. It was as if the absence of the tune was more oppressive than its presence had ever been. A collective amnesia seemed to descend upon the residents, the events of the past weeks fading into a fog of forgetfulness. We watched as the neighborhood slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, but it was a hollow, eerie calm. The laughter of children no longer echoed through the streets, and neighbors passed each other with wary, uncertain glances. The sense of community that had once been the heart of our neighborhood had been irrevocably altered. As for us, we were left with a lingering sense of loss, an unshakable feeling that something vital had been taken from us, something we could no longer remember. The tune, though gone, continued to haunt the edges of our consciousness, a ghostly melody that refused to be silenced. The days turned into weeks, and the ice cream truck, along with its haunting tune, became a distant, unsettling memory. Our neighborhood had changed, the once vibrant community was now shrouded in a veil of silent confusion. People went about their lives, but there was a noticeable lack of warmth, a missing vibrancy that the tune had seemingly taken with it. Sam, Riley, and I found ourselves drifting apart, not out of disagreement or dislike, but out of an unspoken mutual understanding that something within us had shifted. We had touched a mystery too vast and too dark for our understanding, and in its wake, we were left altered, our perspectives on life irrevocably changed. I would often find myself walking the streets in the evening, half expecting to hear the jingle of the ice cream truck, but it never came. The neighborhood was silent, save for the occasional distant sound of a television or the bark of a dog. It was as if the truck had vanished into thin air, leaving no trace behind, except for the lingering effects on those who had heard its tune. The sense of paranoia never completely left me. I would catch myself glancing over my shoulder, a feeling of being watched creeping over me. The tune would sometimes play at the edges of my dreams, a ghostly whisper that faded as soon as I tried to grasp it. I couldn't shake off the feeling that we had only glimpsed the surface of something much deeper, much more sinister. The truck, its driver, the tune, they were all parts of a puzzle that we had failed to solve, a mystery that continued to loom over our neighborhood, unseen but ever present. Months passed, and life slowly returned to a new normal. But the atmosphere in the neighborhood was different, a subtle undercurrent of fear and unease lingered. Conversations were shorter, smiles were strained, and a general sense of wariness pervaded the air. As for the ice cream truck, it became a topic that was silently agreed upon to be left undiscussed, a shared experience that we all chose to forget. But in the quiet moments, when the world around me stilled, I couldn't help but wonder about the forgotten melody, about the memories it had taken, and the secrets it still held. The story of the ice cream truck and its enigmatic tune became a part of the neighborhood's lore, a whispered tale of caution and mystery. And though the truck was gone, the feeling it left behind lingered. The tune, though forgotten, remained a haunting presence, a reminder of the mysteries that lie just beneath the surface of our seemingly ordinary lives. And sometimes, in the depths of the night, I would find myself listening for a melody that I could never quite remember, a tune that had vanished from memory, but it left an indelible mark on my soul. It was out there somewhere, I was sure of it, waiting in the shadows, its secrets forever just out of reach. I always believed my job as a delivery driver was straightforward. Drive, deliver, and drive back. That was until the day my GPS malfunctioned, leading me through the winding roads of a remote mountain range, and towards a military base known more for its myths than its might. This is where my ordinary life took an extraordinary turn. It was a crisp Tuesday morning, and I had a package to deliver. The address, strangely enough, pointed towards the military base at the foot of the mountains. I'd heard stories about this place, mostly whispers of top-secret experiments in forbidden territory. I'd always dismissed these as rural legends, but there was an unnerving air as I approached the gates. The guard at the entrance seemed as puzzled as I was by the delivery address. Scratching his head, he waved me through, instructing me to head towards the administrative building. I drove past rows of barracks and military vehicles, feeling the weight of numerous eyes on me. The base was vast, but it had an eerie quietness, like a town abandoned in haste. Following the GPS directions, I found myself at a nondescript building, far removed from the central hub of activity. No signage, no windows, just a steel door and a loading dock. I parked and hauled the package out, approaching the door. That's when things started to go awry. As I pressed the buzzer, the ground beneath me shuddered. The door swung open, and I was greeted not by a person, but by a gaping elevator, large enough to fit a truck. Confusion clouded my judgment as I stepped in, package in hand, thinking this was part of the delivery process. The moment the elevator doors closed, a sinking feeling hit me, quite literally. The elevator began its descent, and the numbers on the panel were a blur, ticking down rapidly. I was going deeper into the earth than I had ever imagined. I tried pressing buttons, but the elevator seemed to have a mind of its own. As I descended into the depths, I overheard a crackling voice from the intercom speaking about Echo Ridge. My heart raced. This was no ordinary military base, and I was about to uncover its deepest secrets. The elevator's relentless descent finally halted with a jarring thud that echoed through the metal box. The door slid open, revealing a corridor bathed in sterile white light. Stepping out, I clutched the package tighter, my senses heightened by the uncertainty of my surroundings. This was no ordinary military facility. The air was thick with a palpable tension that made my skin crawl. I cautiously moved down the corridor, passing doors with cryptic labels and observing cameras that dotted the ceiling. The deeper I ventured, the more I realized this place was shrouded in mystery. Hushed voices and hurried footsteps resonated off the walls, but no one was in sight. It felt like I was walking through a ghost town, one hidden deep beneath the mountain. As I turned a corner, I stumbled upon an open area bustling with activity. My jaw dropped in disbelief. Before me, humans and creatures of an otherworldly nature worked side by side. These beings, aliens, were nothing like the fictional creatures I'd seen in movies. They were tall and slender, with translucent skin that revealed a faint luminescent vascular system underneath. Their eyes, large and unblinking, seemed to miss nothing. I ducked behind a pillar, my heart racing. I watched as they interacted with the humans' conversation seemed tense but collaborative. I overheard snippets about project timelines and surface impact. The sheer scale of what was happening around me was overwhelming. I was in over my head, a mere delivery driver caught in a clandestine operation involving beings from another world. In my daze, I barely noticed the military official who approached me. He was stern, his eyes narrowing as he took in my delivery uniform. "You're not supposed to be here," he said coldly. "Follow me, now." I complied, fear knotting my stomach. He led me through a series of corridors, and we arrived at a room marked Control Center. As he spoke into his radio, calling for a cleanup at the loading dock, my eyes caught sight of a screen displaying a map of the facility Echo Ridge. It was massive, extending over 50 floors beneath the earth. Realizing this might be my only chance, I made a split-second decision. As the official was distracted, I slipped away, blending into the maze of corridors. I had to see more, to understand what was happening in the depths of Echo Ridge. With my heart pounding in my chest, I ventured deeper into the labyrinth of Echo Ridge. The corridors were a maze, each turn revealing more of this hidden world. The air was heavy with a sense of urgency, and the further I went, the more I felt the gravity of what lay beneath the surface. As I moved stealthily, I glimpsed rooms filled with technologies that defied my understanding. There were machines pulsating with energy, screens displaying star charts and unknown languages, and more interactions between humans and aliens. The atmosphere was one of controlled chaos, a symphony of a secret operation unfolding before my eyes. In one lab, I saw what looked like a portal, shimmering with an otherworldly glow. Scientists and aliens worked side by side, tweaking the device with precise movements. My mind raced with questions. Was this a gateway to another world? A new dimension? The possibilities were as terrifying as they were fascinating. I overheard bits and pieces of conversations about surface integration and Phase 2 commencement. It was clear that whatever was happening here wasn't confined to the depths of this mountain. It had implications far beyond. I continued my surreptitious journey until I stumbled upon a room that sent chills down my spine. Through the glass, I saw a group of creatures unlike the others I had encountered. They were confined, looking distressed and agitated. A sign read specimen containment. The sight was deeply unsettling. It was one thing to work alongside aliens, but another to hold them against their will. As I absorbed the gravity of this discovery, I accidentally bumped into a cart, sending a metal object clattering to the floor. The sound echoed through the hall, and I knew I had to move quickly. I dashed down the nearest corridor, my breath ragged in my ears. I soon found myself outside a conference room. Through the gap in the door, I saw military officials and alien delegates in a heated discussion. The words surface impact and experiment activation floated out to me. My mind reeled at the thought of what kind of experiment they could be discussing, one that involved both humans and aliens, and had the potential to impact the surface world. In that moment, I realized the true scope of Echo Ridge. It wasn't just a military base or research facility, it was a nexus point for something much bigger, something that could change the world as we knew it. And I had unwittingly become a part of it. My discovery at the conference room marked the turning point. I knew I couldn't just leave Echo Ridge with this knowledge. The weight of responsibility bore down on me, yet fear gnawed at my resolve. I had to act, but I was just a delivery driver in a world of soldiers and extraterrestrials. As I turned to leave, an alarm blared through the facility. Red lights flashed, bathing the corridor in an ominous glow. I heard shouts and the sound of rushing footsteps. They had discovered my intrusion. Panic set in, and instinct took over. I ran, darting through corridors, my mind racing for a way out. But escape wasn't my only goal now. I needed to stop whatever they were planning. In my frenzied dash, I found myself back at the conference room. The door was ajar, the room now empty. I slipped inside, hoping to find anything to give me an edge. My eyes fell upon a set of documents labeled Operation Ascendancy. Skimming through, I realized the horrifying truth. They planned to activate a device, one that could potentially alter the fabric of reality. The experiment was set to commence imminently. Adrenaline surged through me. I couldn't let this happen. I had to sabotage their plan. But how? I was no scientist or soldier, I was out of my depth. Yet, the determination to prevent a potential catastrophe propelled me forward. Clutching the documents, I left the room and stumbled upon a group of scientists and aliens, their expressions marked with worry and dissent. Among them, I recognized a face from the containment room, a sympathetic scientist who seemed uncomfortable with the project. In a moment of reckless bravery, I approached them. "I know about Operation Ascendancy," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I want to help stop it." To my surprise, they didn't call for security. Instead, a look of relief washed over their faces. They were part of a covert resistance within Echo Ridge, working against the experiment. With their guidance, I navigated the facility's underbelly towards the main control center. The plan was to introduce a virus into the system, delaying the experiment and giving the resistance more time to act. The facility was in chaos, allowing us to move relatively unnoticed. But as we reached the control center, we were met with armed guards. A standoff ensued, the tension palpable. Then, chaos erupted. The resistance members acted swiftly, engaging the guards. Amidst the confusion, I rushed to the main console, the virus-loaded USB in hand. My heart pounded as I inserted it into the port. The screen flickered, and an array of codes cascaded down. I had done it, I had sabotaged the experiment. But our triumph was short-lived. Reinforcements swarmed the control center, and our small group was quickly overwhelmed. As I was being restrained, my eyes met those of the sympathetic scientist. There was a silent promise in that glance: the fight wasn't over. But for me, it was the end of the line. Or so I thought. Captured and disoriented, I was dragged through the facility. The reality of my situation weighed heavily on me. I had disrupted their plans, but at what cost? I was just a delivery driver, now a prisoner in a world that was beyond my comprehension. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The facility trembled, lights flickering, as if reacting to the virus I had introduced into the system. In the ensuing chaos, the grip of my captors loosened. Seizing the opportunity, I broke free, sprinting through the disarray. I ran, driven by a desperate need to escape and reveal the truth of Echo Ridge. I maneuvered through the chaos, dodging soldiers and scientists. I saw the resistance members fighting bravely, their determination inspiring me to push through my fear. As I navigated the maze-like corridors, I stumbled upon the group of alien specimens I had seen earlier. The containment area was compromised, and they were escaping. One of them, a being with piercing blue eyes, paused and looked directly at me. There was an intelligence and a depth of emotion in its gaze that was unmistakably sentient. In that moment, I understood that these creatures were not just specimens, they were sentient beings, caught in a conflict they didn't choose. Pushing forward, I finally reached the elevator. The facility was in lockdown, but the power surges caused by the virus had disrupted the security protocols. I entered the elevator, my heart racing as I ascended towards the surface. As the elevator climbed, I felt the weight of what I had witnessed. Echo Ridge was a place of wonders and horrors, a junction of human ambition and extraterrestrial involvement. The knowledge I had gained was a burden I would carry forever. Reaching the surface, I emerged into the fading light of day. The base seemed normal, the chaos hidden beneath a facade of military precision. But I knew better. I had evidence, the documents from the control center. They were my proof of the truths lurking beneath Echo Ridge. I slipped away from the base, unnoticed in the shift change of the guards. As I drove away, the mountain range looming in my rearview mirror, I was filled with a mix of relief and dread. Relief at my escape, and dread for the unknown consequences of what I had set in motion. The world above remained oblivious to the shadow cast by Echo Ridge, but I couldn't unsee what I had witnessed. The fight against Operation Ascendancy was not mine alone anymore. The resistance within Echo Ridge would carry on, but I had a different role to play now. I had to expose the truth, no matter the cost. I drove through the night, the haunting memories of Echo Ridge etched into my mind. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was fueled by a newfound purpose. The world needed to know about the depths beneath the mountain, about the collaboration and conflict between humans and extraterrestrials, and the dangers of unbridled ambition. As dawn broke, I found myself miles away from the base, in a small, nondescript diner. The normalcy of the scene around me was jarring. People went about their lives, unaware of the hidden world I had just escaped. I sat there, clutching the stolen documents, the only tangible proof of my ordeal. I knew the risks of exposing Echo Ridge. The military would go to great lengths to keep it a secret. But the public deserved the truth. The operation I had disrupted wasn't just a military experiment, it was a gamble with the unknown, one that could have dire consequences for everyone. But how could I, Alex the delivery driver, make them believe? The story seemed like a delusion, a plot lifted from a science fiction novel. Yet, the documents in my possession held the power to change minds, to reveal the truth in undeniable clarity. I made a decision. I would leak the documents anonymously. Let the truth stand on its own. The diner's Wi-Fi provided the anonymity I needed. I scanned and uploaded the documents to every major news outlet I could think of, and to the internet at large. The truth about Echo Ridge would no longer be buried beneath layers of secrecy. As I had said, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. I had crossed the point of no return. My life would never be the same again. The once clear lines of my existence had been blurred, rewritten by the knowledge of what lay beneath Echo Ridge. In the days that followed, the world erupted with the revelations of Echo Ridge. Debates raged, conspiracies were born, and the truth fought its way through skepticism and disbelief. The military denied, then remained silent, their silence speaking volumes. As for me, I disappeared into the background. My role in the story of Echo Ridge remained unknown, a secret I would carry forever. The diner, the documents, and the decision to reveal the truth were now part of a past life. I had seen the depths of human and alien ambition, the thin line between discovery and disaster. Echo Ridge continued to be shrouded in mystery and speculation. But somewhere in that hidden world, the resistance fought on, and the truth, once buried, found its way to the surface. I drove on, a silent guardian of a secret too vast for any one person to bear, knowing that the world above remained blissfully unaware of the shadows cast by the depths of Echo Ridge. I never considered my life anything out of the ordinary. My name is Jack, a 21-year-old college student in a small, unremarkable town, where everyone knows everyone. My days were a predictable blend of lectures, study sessions, and the occasional night out with friends. But that was before everything changed, before people started seeing me in places I'd never been. It started subtly. A classmate mentioned she saw me at the grocery store on a day I spent entirely on campus. I laughed it off, assuming it was a case of mistaken identity. Then it happened again. A professor commented on my odd behavior in the library, a place I hadn't visited in months. Mild confusion turned into unsettling curiosity. Was there someone in town who looked just like me? I have always stood out in my group of friends, not just for my distinctive mop of curly hair and a penchant for vintage jackets, but for my outgoing nature. My best friends, Jamie and Tyler, often joke that I could make friends with a shadow. But shadows don't walk around town, mimicking your every feature. The small college town, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, had always felt like a cocoon, safe and familiar. But as more sightings of my lookalike came to light, that sense of safety started to fray at the edges. Each mention of my doppelganger added another stitch to a tapestry of unease that now hung over my daily life. Jamie and Tyler noticed the change in me. I was no longer the carefree friend they knew. My laughter came less frequently, and my eyes constantly darted around, half expecting to catch a glimpse of this mysterious double. I remember the evening Jamie confronted me, their face etched with concern and confusion. "Jack, why did you ignore me at the cafe today?" Jamie asked, hurt evident in their voice. "I wasn't at the cafe today, Jamie. I spent the whole day in the chemistry lab," I replied, a chill running down my spine. The disbelief in Jamie's eyes said it all. They were certain it was me. And why wouldn't they be? Who else in this small town looked exactly like me? That night, I lay in bed, the shadows in my room morphing into sinister shapes. The boundaries of my identity felt blurred, as if someone else was slowly erasing the lines that defined who I was. The idea of someone walking around, wearing my face, doing things I would never do, it was like living in a nightmare. But unlike a nightmare, I couldn't wake up from this. The first chapter of my story might seem mundane, a simple case of mistaken identity. But believe me, it was only the beginning of a descent into a reality far more terrifying than I could ever imagine. The next day, the weight of the situation started to truly sink in. Jamie's words echoed in my mind, a relentless reminder that something deeply unsettling was happening. I could no longer dismiss it as mere coincidences. It was time to confront this bizarre mystery head-on. I began my own investigation, starting with talking to those who claimed to have seen me. Each account was eerily similar. They described me, or rather, someone who looked exactly like me, down to the smallest detail. This other Jack was seen in various parts of town, sipping coffee at the local cafe, browsing books at the bookstore, even jogging in the park. Places I frequented, but not at the times mentioned. The peculiar thing was, according to these accounts, my doppelganger never interacted much. He was always seen alone, his actions mundane yet strangely detached. It was as if he was mimicking a normal life, but lacked the essence that made it genuinely mine. With each story, a sense of dread grew inside me. It was one thing to hear about a lookalike, but the consistency of these sightings painted a much darker picture. Someone, or something, was impersonating me with chilling accuracy. Jamie and Tyler became my pillars during this time, their skepticism slowly turning into concern. We spent nights poring over the internet, diving into forums and old books, searching for anything that might explain what was happening. That's when we stumbled upon the old folklore of doppelgangers, ghostly doubles of living people, often considered omens of bad luck or even death. The more we read, the more the pieces seemed to fit, yet it all felt like grasping at straws. How could ancient myths explain what was happening to me? I wanted logical answers, but logic seemed to have left my life the moment my double stepped into it. Amidst the search for answers, strange occurrences began to happen. I'd find items in my apartment misplaced, though I lived alone. I'd wake up with a jolt, feeling as if someone had just left the room. My memories began to blur, moments I was sure I had experienced started to feel like they belonged to someone else. It was as though my sense of self was being eroded, piece by piece, by this unseen twin. Fear took a firm grip on my life. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows that resembled my form. The mirror became my enemy, each reflection a question: was it me, or was it him? This chapter of my story might sound like a delusion, a mind playing tricks on itself. But it was real as the growing fear that I was losing myself to an entity I didn't understand. The unknown nature of my doppelganger was a puzzle I was desperate to solve, not realizing that the next piece to be placed would lead me to a confrontation I was entirely unprepared for. The sightings of my doppelganger escalated, each one more personal and invasive than the last. It was no longer just public spaces. He was seen outside my childhood home, a place filled with memories and moments that were exclusively mine. The most chilling incident was when someone claimed to have seen him at my grandmother's grave. That sacred space, a private haven of grief and remembrance, had been violated. The boundaries between him and me were blurring, and with it, my grip on reality. Jamie, Tyler, and I dove deeper into the lore surrounding doppelgangers. We scoured local history for similar occurrences, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain the phenomena. The folklore we unearthed spoke of doppelgangers as harbingers of misfortune, but these were just stories, right? Yet, the more we read, the more I couldn't shake off the feeling that these tales were more than mere superstitions. As the days passed, the occurrences around me grew stranger. My belongings would be found in places I hadn't left them. I'd hear whispers in my apartment late at night, echoes of conversations I never had. Sleep became elusive, filled with nightmares of being chased by an unseen figure, always just a step behind me. But it wasn't just the physical occurrences that tormented me. It was the psychological toll, the constant questioning of my sanity. Every time I looked in the mirror, I wondered if the reflection staring back was truly me. The man in the mirror mimicked my movements, but his eyes seemed hollow, as if lacking the spark that made me, me. It was during this time that my relationships began to strain. People in town looked at me with suspicion and fear. They whispered behind my back, unsure if I was the real Jack or the other one. Friends I had known for years crossed the street to avoid me. I was becoming a pariah in my own town, a ghost of the person I once was. Jamie and Tyler stood by me, but the strain was evident. Our conversations were filled with unspoken questions and fears. The easy camaraderie we once shared was replaced by a tense alliance, united against a threat we didn't fully understand. As the days turned into weeks, my life became a waking nightmare. I was living in a constant state of heightened alertness, jumping as shadows, my heart racing at the slightest sound. The fear of encountering my double consumed me. I avoided my usual haunts, became reclusive, and watched the world with wary, tired eyes. Then came the day that changed everything. A chance to confront my fears, to face the entity that had turned my life into a living hell. A local librarian, who knew me well, called to say she'd seen my doppelganger in the library just an hour ago. The library, a place of solace and learning, where I had spent countless hours lost in books. It felt like a deliberate taunt, a challenge. I remember standing outside the library, my heart pounding in my chest. The sun was setting, casting long shadows on the ground, shadows that seemed to mock my resolve. With every step I took towards the entrance, my anxiety grew. What would I say? What would I do? But I had to know. I had to face him. The confrontation I was about to have, in the quiet dusty aisles of the library, would be the climax of this surreal ordeal. It was a moment I thought I wanted, but as I pushed open the library door, I realized I was terrified of the truth I might find. The library was quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every small sound, the rustle of pages, the distant footsteps, the beating of my own heart. It was a familiar place, filled with the comforting smell of old books, and the faint hint of coffee from the cafe next door. But that day, it felt alien, as if I had stepped into a world slightly askew from my own. I moved through the aisles, my eyes scanning for a face identical to mine. The librarians gave me curious looks but said nothing. They knew me well enough, but the air around us was thick with unspoken questions. Was I the real Jack, or was I the other one? Then, I saw him. He was there, in the history section, casually browsing through books as if he belonged in my life, in my world. My breath caught in my throat. He was me, in every conceivable way. The same curly hair, the same height, the same way of tilting his head when he read something interesting. Our eyes met, and for a moment, time stood still. I saw recognition in his eyes, a mirror of my own shock, but there was something else, something cold and emotionless. It was like looking into a void where my soul should have been. Why are you doing this? I managed to choke out, my voice a mix of anger, fear, and confusion. He placed the book down and turned fully towards me. His movements were eerily similar to mine, but there was a precision to them that was unnatural. When he spoke, it was with my voice, but devoid of any warmth. You wouldn't understand, Jack. Not yet, he said, his words sending a chill down my spine. Understand what? Why are you here, impersonating me? He smiled, a perfect replica of my own, but it didn't reach his eyes. I am here because you are here. We are bound, you and I, in ways you can't yet comprehend. But why? What do you want from me? My voice trembled, a mix of fear and frustration. His eyes held mine, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something, pity, maybe, or amusement. You'll see in time. Just remember, Jack, not everything is as it seems. Not even yourself. Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing between the aisles. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. The confrontation left me with more questions than answers. Who or what was he? What did he mean by his cryptic words? I left the library in a daze, the encounter replaying over and over in my mind. It felt surreal, like a scene from a movie, yet it was undeniably real. The doppelganger's words haunted me, echoing in the depths of my mind. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts and fears. The reality I had known was crumbling, replaced by a world where my own reflection was a stranger. The line between Jack and the other Jack was blurring, and I feared losing myself to this shadowy double. The confrontation at the library was supposed to bring clarity, but it only deepened the mystery. I was left with a sense of unease, a fear of what was to come. Little did I know, the events that followed would only spiral further into darkness, challenging the very essence of who I thought I was. In the days following the confrontation, a heavy silence settled over my life. The sightings of my double ceased abruptly, as if our encounter in the library had been a final act in a twisted play. But the absence of the doppelganger didn't bring relief. Instead, it left a void, a lingering sense of unease that clung to me like a second skin. The town's attitude towards me had shifted palpably. People I once considered friends now regarded me with a mix of curiosity and wariness. Their eyes would flicker with doubt upon seeing me, as if questioning which Jack stood before them. The whispers that followed me were a constant reminder of the doppelganger's impact. I felt like a ghost, haunting the fringes of a life I once lived freely. Even my relationship with Jamie and Tyler changed. They tried to hide their apprehension, but it was there, lurking beneath the surface of every conversation. We were still friends, but the trust and ease that had defined our friendship were tainted with the shadow of uncertainty. They wanted to believe I was still me, but doubt is a persistent weed, difficult to eradicate once planted. My own psyche began to unravel. Paranoia crept into my every thought. I avoided mirrors, no longer able to bear the sight of my own reflection, fearing I might see him instead. Sleep was elusive, filled with nightmares where I chased my double through endless corridors, never quite catching up. My waking hours were no better, a constant vigil against a threat that had vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared. I began to question my own identity. Who was I, if someone could replicate my existence so effortlessly? The lines between reality and illusion blurred, leaving me adrift in a sea of existential dread. The doppelganger had not just impersonated my appearance, he had stolen a piece of my essence, leaving a hollow where my confidence once resided. The incident at the library had been the climax of this ordeal, but the aftermath was a slow descent into a personal hell. The fear of encountering my double had been replaced by a deeper, more insidious fear of losing myself, of becoming nothing more than a shadow of who I once was. Days turned into weeks, and the eerie calm persisted. The doppelganger remained a specter of the past, but his legacy lingered. The town slowly returned to its routine, but I remained trapped in a limbo of my own making. The resolution to this nightmare seemed as elusive as the doppelganger himself. I longed for closure, for a return to normalcy, but some wounds run too deep to heal. The final chapter of my story was approaching, a chapter one hoped would bring answers, but feared would only bring more questions. I didn't know it then, but the end of this ordeal was far from over. The true test of my identity, of my sanity, was yet to come. As I navigated the treacherous waters of my fractured reality, I clung to the hope that I would emerge whole on the other side. But hope is a fragile thing, easily shattered by the harsh truths of a world that no longer made sense. The resolution to my ordeal began unexpectedly, with a text from Jamie late one evening. Need to see you. Urgent. Come to the cafe. The message was brief, but the urgency in it was palpable. It had been weeks since the last sighting of my doppelganger, and a part of me had begun to hope that the nightmare was finally over. This message, however, reignited the embers of fear that I had been desperately trying to extinguish. I hurried to the cafe, the streets eerily quiet under the cloak of night. My footsteps echoed off the buildings, a lonely sound in the stillness. The cafe was closed, but a faint light glowed inside. Jamie must have stayed late, I thought. I quickened my pace, eager to find out why Jamie needed to see me so urgently. As I approached the cafe, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Jamie, this time more frantic. Where are you? Please hurry. Confusion swirled within me. If Jamie was inside the cafe, why were they texting as if I were late? I reached the cafe and pushed the door open, the bell tinkling softly. The cafe was empty except for Jamie, who sat at our usual table, their face pale and eyes wide with fear. Jack, thank God you're here, Jamie said, their voice trembling. I saw him again, your double. He was just outside, watching the cafe. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Where is he now? I asked, scanning the cafe for any sign of my doppelganger. I don't know. He disappeared when I texted you. But Jack, he looked different. More menacing, somehow. The fear that had become my constant companion tightened its grip on me. I felt trapped, caught in a sinister game with rules I didn't understand. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Why had my double returned? What did he want? We decided to leave the cafe together, seeking safety in numbers. As we stepped outside, the street was desolate, bathed in the cold light of the street lamps. We walked in silence, each lost in our thoughts, the weight of the situation bearing down on us. That's when it happened. My phone buzzed with another message, this time from Tyler. Jack, where are you? Jamie's here, and they're freaking out. Said they saw your double at the cafe. My blood turned to ice. If Jamie was with Tyler, then who was the person I had just left the cafe with? I turned to look at the person beside me, but they were gone, vanished into the night as if they had never been there. Panic surged through me, a tidal wave of fear and disbelief. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The doppelganger had tricked me, luring me out under the guise of Jamie. I ran back to the cafe, but it was empty, the door swinging gently in the night breeze. The eerie quiet of the street mocked me, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. The story ends here, but the resolution is far from complete. The doppelganger is still out there, a shadowy figure that haunts my every step. I live in a world of constant vigilance, never knowing if the person I'm talking to is real or just another trick of my double. The fear remains, a constant companion in my life. I know now that the doppelganger is a part of me, a manifestation of something I may never fully understand. The town has moved on, but I remain trapped in this nightmare, forever looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next encounter with the other me. And so, my story ends, not with answers, but with questions. Questions about identity, reality, and the very nature of existence. The doppelganger is still out there, a reminder that some mysteries are never truly solved, and some shadows never fully disappear. The city lights flickered like distant stars as I leaned against the cool metal railing of the overpass, gazing down at the streaming traffic below. I've always been fascinated by cars, their sleek designs, the roar of their engines, the sense of freedom they symbolize. Yet, standing there, a part of me felt hollow, as if all my dreams of speed and luxury were just that, dreams. My name is Rob, a regular guy with a 9-to-5 job and a modest apartment in the heart of a city. But inside me, there was always this burning desire for more, a yearning to break free from the chains of mediocrity. That's when I first heard about it, the urban legend of the cursed Bugatti. They said it was a phantom on wheels, a spectral vision that roamed the city streets at night. A symbol of everything I ever wanted but felt I couldn't have. And behind its wheel, a ghostly figure that resembled Tate, a man whose name was synonymous with a life of extravagance, fast cars, faster living, and a brash confidence that seemed unattainable. I remember scoffing at the stories initially. Ghost cars and spectral drivers were the stuff of cheap horror flicks, not real life. But the more I heard, the deeper my fascination grew. I found myself drawn to this legend, this cursed Bugatti that appeared to those who felt inadequate, who felt they hadn't achieved enough. It was as if it was calling out to me, whispering my deepest fears and desires. So, I started my quest. Night after night, I roamed the city streets, hoping for just a glimpse of this enigmatic vehicle. My friends thought I was losing it, chasing after a ghost, a mere figment of urban myth. But I couldn't help it. I needed to see it, to prove to myself that I wasn't just chasing shadows. And then, one night, under the pale glow of the streetlights, I saw it. The Bugatti. It was more magnificent and terrifying than I had ever imagined. The Bugatti was unlike anything I had ever seen. Its sleek black body glided through the streets with an eerie grace, its headlights piercing through the darkness like the eyes of a predator. My heart raced as I followed it, drawn irresistibly to its spectral allure. As it turned a corner, I hurried after it, my footsteps echoing at the empty street. Then, as abruptly as it had appeared, the Bugatti stopped. The engine's hum fell silent, and the night seemed to hold its breath. I approached cautiously, my eyes fixed on the driver's seat, where the ghostly figure of Tate sat, his gaze piercing through me. "You'll never be like me, too weak, too ordinary," he whispered, his voice a chilling blend of contempt and pity. Those words struck me like a cold blade. It was as if he had voiced the darkest thoughts that lurked in the corners of my mind. I stumbled back, the image of the Bugatti blurring as my eyes swelled with tears. The car and its driver faded into the night, leaving me alone with a heart pounding in fear and frustration. That night was a turning point. The legend was real, and so was the curse. The whisper I heard wasn't just Tate's voice, it was the manifestation of my own insecurities, my own fears of being forever unremarkable. I became obsessed. I spent my nights wandering the streets, searching for the Bugatti. My days were consumed with research, delving into every story, every sighting of the cursed car. The more I learned, the more I realized I was not alone. Others had seen it too, and each had their own tale of misfortune and despair that followed. I heard stories of people who, after encountering the Bugatti, fell into deep depression, their lives unraveling as they succumbed to the haunting whispers of inadequacy. Some spoke of seeing visions of themselves achieving great success, only to have it snatched away, leaving them in a worse state than before. I should have been scared, should have heeded the warnings to stay away. But the curse had its hooks in me. I couldn't let go. Not yet. Not when I felt so close to understanding, to confronting whatever it was that the Bugatti represented. As the days blurred into nights, my life began to mirror the very tales I had obsessively researched. Friends, once close, drifted away, confused and concerned by my relentless pursuit of the cursed Bugatti. My job, which I had always taken pride in, suffered as I lost focus, my thoughts perpetually clouded by the haunting image of the spectral car and its disdainful driver. My every waking moment was tormented by visions of Tate, his ghostly figure appearing at the most unexpected times. In these hallucinations, he was always one step ahead, playing chess and outmaneuvering me at every turn, his mocking laughter echoing in my ears. He would toast to my failures with a glass of sparkling water, his eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. These encounters, though figments of my strained psyche, felt incredibly real. Tate's words were like venom, seeping into my mind, amplifying my insecurities. "You're just a brokey Rob. You'll never achieve greatness," he would sneer. Each taunt was a reminder of my own perceived shortcomings. I realized then that the curse was more than just a spectral apparition, it was a reflection of my inner demons, my fear of mediocrity. The Bugatti, a symbol of unattainable success, had become a twisted mirror, showing me an exaggerated version of my deepest anxieties. During my research, I stumbled upon an old journal in the city's archives. It belonged to someone who had once been obsessed with the Bugatti, much like myself. Their writings spoke of a similar descent into madness, driven by the relentless pursuit of something that always seemed just out of reach. But in their final entry, there was a revelation of realization that the curse could only hold power over those who allowed their insecurities to consume them. This discovery was a glimmer of hope in the darkness that had enveloped my life. I understood that the key to breaking free from the curse wasn't in chasing after the Bugatti, but in confronting the fears and doubts that it represented. Emboldened by this new insight, I resolved to face Tate and his spectral Bugatti one last time. I had to confront the source of my torment, to break the cycle of despair that had gripped me. I prepared myself for what I knew would be the most challenging confrontation of my life. The night air was heavy as I walked the familiar streets, a mix of determination and apprehension swirling within me. My every sense was heightened, anticipating the inevitable encounter. Then, as if summoned by my resolve, the cursed Bugatti appeared, its sleek form materializing out of the darkness. I stood in its path, my heart pounding in my chest. The car halted mere feet from me, its engine purring menacingly. The door opened, and the spectral Tate stepped out, his presence more intimidating than ever. "You're still trying. Pathetic," he taunted, his voice echoing in the empty street. Gathering every ounce of courage, I confronted him. "This ends tonight, Tate. I'm not your prisoner anymore." Tate laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You think you can escape? You're nothing, Rob. A nobody." His words stung, but I held my ground. Maybe I am ordinary. But being ordinary doesn't mean I'm worthless. My value isn't defined by your standards or anyone else's. Tate's expression changed, his confidence faltering for a moment. I continued, I've realized that the real curse isn't this car or even you. It's the fear and insecurity within me. And I'm letting them go. As I spoke, something miraculous happened. The Bugatti began to fade, its form becoming translucent. Tate's figure also started to dissolve, his sneer turning into a look of disbelief. No? You can't just, he protested, his voice now a desperate whisper. But it was too late. The more I accepted myself, the more the phantom and his car vanished, until nothing remained but the empty street and the night sky above. The curse was broken. The weight of my insecurities, the burden of constantly measuring myself against impossible standards, lifted. For the first time in what felt like forever, I breathed freely, a sense of peace washing over me. In the aftermath of my confrontation with Tate and the vanishing Bugatti, the world seemed different, as if a fog had lifted from my eyes. The streets were just streets again, the night air just a cool breeze, no longer heavy with ominous whispers. I walked back home, feeling lighter with each step. The haunting vision ceased, and Tate's voice, once a constant echo of discouragement, was silent. It was as if by facing him, I had silenced my own doubts. The days that followed were a time of healing and reflection. I reconnected with friends, explaining my absence as best I could without delving too much into the unbelievable truth. Work became a place of achievement again, no longer a battleground for my insecurities. As I rebuilt my life, I found joy in the ordinary, in the small victories and simple pleasures. The curse had taught me a valuable lesson. My worth wasn't tied to extraordinary achievements or material symbols of success. It was in the everyday effort, the small steps forward, the resilience in the face of life's challenges. The city, once a labyrinth in my quest for the Bugatti, now felt like a place of endless possibilities. I found contentment in being just Rob, not a man chasing shadows of greatness, but someone living his life, one day at a time. Life moved on. The legend of the cursed Bugatti became a distant memory, a surreal chapter in my past. I sometimes wondered if others were still being lured by its spectral allure, trapped in their own cycles of doubt and despair. The city had many stories, and I was just one among them. Yet, in my heart, I carried the knowledge that the Bugatti, or whatever form one's fears might take, could be overcome. The real battle was within, against the inner demons of inadequacy and self-doubt. As I walked the city streets, now with a confident stride, I knew that somewhere out there, the legend continued. But for those who might encounter the cursed Bugatti, I hope they would find their way out of the darkness, just as I had. The story of the Bugatti's curse was not just a tale of a haunted car and a ghostly driver, it was a reminder of the power within each of us to confront our fears and redefine our own worth. And as for me, I was no longer haunted by what I wasn't. I had found peace in who I was. I never thought an unmarked envelope would change my life. It was a crisp autumn evening when I found it slid under my apartment door, a heavy cream-colored envelope with my name, Adam, written in elegant script. Inside, an embossed invitation beckoned me to join an elite social club, known among the city's ambitious circles for its exclusivity and the power of its members. As an aspiring entrepreneur, I saw this as my golden ticket. I envisioned rubbing shoulders with magnates and moguls, my own success just a handshake away. The club's headquarters was a spectacle of opulence. Nestled in a secluded part of the city, its towering gates opened to a sprawling estate that seemed to mock the modesty of the surrounding buildings. The night of the induction, I remember stepping into the grand hall, my heart racing with a mix of excitement and nerves. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne, and the soft clink of fine crystal. It was a different world, one where wealth whispered in every corner. Mr. Tate, the club's enigmatic leader, was a man who seemed to personify success. His presence was commanding, his gaze sharp and discerning. He was the archetype of achievement, a self-made millionaire known for his luxury Bugattis, a love for sparkling water, and a past dotted with MMA championships and chess accolades. He called the members his elite, but the way he said it, you'd think he meant army. "Welcome, Adam," he greeted, his voice smooth and reassuring. "Here, we celebrate the exceptional. You'll find that our games are not just about winning, but about proving your worth." I should have seen the red flags, then the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, the almost predatory gleam when he talked about the games. But I was blinded by the allure of success, the intoxicating mix of adrenaline and possibility. I wanted to be a part of this world, no matter the cost. And so, I stepped into the grand game of the elite, unaware of the nightmare that awaited me. The first challenge was set for the very next evening. I remember walking into the club's lavish courtyard, transformed into a grand arena. The air buzzed with anticipation, members gathering in clusters, sipping their sparkling water, their laughter echoing under the starlit sky. Mr. Tate took center stage, his charismatic presence commanding attention. "Tonight's game," he announced, "is a testament to our superiority. We race our Bugattis through the city's heart, a playground for the powerful. Remember, it's not just about speed, but about showing the brokies what they could never have." I felt a twinge of discomfort at his words, a subtle warning I chose to ignore. The race was exhilarating, a blur of neon lights and roaring engines, but it was more than just a display of wealth and speed. It was a mockery of those less fortunate, a spectacle that glorified the gap between us and them. As the nights passed, the games grew more intense. MMA fights where victory was measured in bruises and blood, chess matches that were less about strategy and more about domination. Each event was a twisted celebration of wealth and physical prowess, a cycle of one-upmanship that left no room for weakness. But it was during these games that I began to notice something unsettling. The winners, draped in their temporary glory, would strut like peacocks, their arrogance unbounded. The losers, however, would withdraw into themselves, their eyes haunted, as if something vital had been taken from them. It was a disturbing transformation, one that hinted at a deeper, more malevolent force at play. Curiosity turned to concern, and concern to fear, as I delved into the club's history. Whispers in dark corners spoke of members who tried to leave, but met with tragic, unexplainable ends. There were tales of an insatiable entity, a demonic presence that fed on the ego and despair of the club's members. The realization hit me like a cold wave. We were not just members of an elite club. We were pawns in a game far more dangerous, bound to a cycle of competition and degradation, orchestrated by something not of this world. And like the others, I was trapped, ensnared by my own ambition and the intoxicating lure of the game. As the weeks turned into months, the nature of the challenges escalated, each more perilous and morally ambiguous than the last. I witnessed the transformation of my peers into either ruthless victors or broken spirits. The club's atmosphere grew increasingly suffocating, the games a grotesque parody of our once noble ambitions. Amidst this, I started to piece together the puzzle. The entity Mr. Tate so reverently spoke of in hushed tones wasn't just a figurehead or a mascot, it was real, a demonic presence feeding on the toxic cycle of ego and despair that permeated the club's walls. Each game, each display of dominance and cruelty, was a tribute to this unseen horror, strengthening it. I remember the night when my turn came to face what I had feared the most. After a particularly grueling chess match, which I had won using cunning rather than brute force, Mr. Tate approached me, his eyes glinting with a mix of admiration and something darker. "Adam, you've proven yourself a worthy player," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "But the true test of your mettle is yet to come." Tomorrow night, the air was electric with anticipation as the members whispered about what the final game could entail. I lay awake that night, my mind racing with scenarios, each more harrowing than the last. It wasn't just about winning anymore, it was about survival. The next evening, the club was eerily silent as I entered. The usual ostentatious display was absent. Instead, there was a simple setup in the center of the main hall, a table with 2 chairs, a chessboard between them. Mr. Tate sat on one side, his demeanor calm yet foreboding. "This is your final game, Adam," he announced, his voice echoing through the hall. "But this is no ordinary chess match. Tonight, you play against the entity itself, through me. Win, and you gain everything. Lose, and you lose more than just a game." I felt a chill run down my spine. The realization dawned on me that this was more than just a test of skill. It was a battle for my very soul, a confrontation with the entity that lurked in the shadows of greed and despair. As the game commenced, I noticed something different in Mr. Tate's eyes. They were deeper, darker, as if something else was looking through them. The entity was here, in this very room, watching, waiting. The game of chess was no longer just a game, it was a battleground where my wit was pitted against an ancient, malevolent intelligence. The chess match with Mr. Tate, or rather, the entity through him, was unlike any I had played before. Each move was a dance with danger, a step closer to either salvation or doom. The entity's strategy was relentless, a mirror of the ruthless ambition that had come to define the club itself. But as the game progressed, a realization dawned on me, a glimmer of hope amidst the encroaching despair. The entity fed on ego, on the relentless pursuit of victory at all costs. It thrived in the poisoned soil of our arrogance and desperation. Perhaps, I thought, the key to defeating it lay not in playing to win, but in playing with humility, with the recognition of my own limitations and the inherent value of others, regardless of their wealth or social standing. I began to make moves that were cautious, measured, even self-sacrificing. With each piece I lost, I could sense the entity's confusion, its hunger for triumph left unfulfilled. Mr. Tate's confident facade began to falter. The entity was losing its grip, its influence waning as I continued to defy the expected norms of the game. As we reached the endgame, I could feel the tide turning. The entity, weakened by my unexpected strategy, struggled to maintain control. In a decisive move, I offered a draw, an act completely alien to the ethos of the club, where only absolute victory was celebrated. There was a moment of silence, a suspended breath in time. Then Mr. Tate, or rather, the entity using his form, leaned back, a look of incredulity etched on his face. The members, who had been watching in rapt attention, murmured among themselves, their expressions a mix of confusion and awe. "I accept the draw," Mr. Tate finally said, his voice no longer smooth and commanding, but tinged with a hint of something akin to respect. In that moment, I knew I had won more than just a chess game. I had broken the cycle, challenged the very foundation on which the club stood. The entity, starved of the ego and despair it needed, receded into the shadows, its hold over the members loosening. The aftermath of the chess game marked a turning point for the club. The entity, weakened by my actions, could no longer maintain its stranglehold. The atmosphere of the club changed almost overnight. The once opulent halls felt hollow, the laughter and bravado of the members fading into a somber realization of what we had all been part of. One by one, the members began to leave, their eyes now open to the truth of the club's sinister nature. The games, once the heart of the club's activities, ceased. The grand halls, which had echoed with the sounds of celebration and competition, now stood silent, a monument to our collective folly. Mr. Tate, or rather the man he had once been before the entity's influence, seemed to age years in just a few days. The arrogance and bravado were gone, replaced by a quiet, almost penitent demeanor. He spoke to me on the last day I visited the club, his words heavy with regret. "Adam, you've shown us all something I think we had forgotten," he said, his gaze wandering over the now empty hall. "True strength lies not in domination or wealth, but in understanding and humility." I fear it took a force as dark as that entity to remind us of our humanity. As I walked through the halls of the club for the last time, I couldn't help but feel a sense of melancholy. This place, which had promised so much, had been nothing more than a gilded cage, a trap for those blinded by ambition and greed. The club, once a symbol of power and success, was now just a shell, its members dispersed, each grappling with the lessons we had learned. The entity, though weakened, was still out there, a lurking reminder of the dangers of unchecked ego and despair. I left the club behind that day, the experience etched deeply in my mind. As I walked through the city streets, the sounds of everyday life around me, I pondered the true meaning of success and self-worth. The club and its games had been an illusion, a distorted reflection of what we, as a society, often hold dear. In seeking power and status, we had lost sight of what truly mattered: our humanity, our empathy, our ability to rise above our baser instincts. As I looked around at the people going about their lives, I realized that true success lay not in wealth or power, but in the connections we make, the kindness we show to others, and the humility with which we walk our path. The entity, though diminished, was a reminder that such darkness still existed in the world, thriving in the shadows of greed and ego. But its defeat at the club was a testament to the power of the human spirit, the ability to overcome even the most malevolent of forces. I walked on, a sense of resolve in my step. The lessons I had learned at the club would stay with me, guiding me in my journey ahead. And as I disappeared into the crowd, a part of me couldn't help but wonder where the entity would surface next, and what new guise it would seek to ensnare the unwary. But for now, at least, the nightmare was over, and the day was mine to embrace. The day I moved into my new apartment, I remember feeling a mix of excitement and loneliness. The latter was something I hadn't anticipated, having been so focused on the new beginning and the freedom it promised. That's when I decided to get a pet. Something to break the silence of my too quiet apartment. I settled on a parakeet, a vibrant little creature with feathers that shimmered like a gemstone under the store's fluorescent lights. I named her Echo. She was my splash of life in a place that still felt too new, too impersonal. In those first few weeks, Echo seemed just like any other bird. She chirped cheerfully during the day, occasionally mimicking sounds from her cage in the corner of my living room. My apartment, once echoing with the hollow sound of my own footsteps, now resonated with her lively presence. It was during a quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted my small living room in shades of gold and amber, that I first heard it. Echo, perched on her swing, cocked her head and in a voice much deeper than her usual chirps, uttered a phrase that chilled my blood. Aware of the hidden truths, she croaked in a tone that was gravelly and deep, a stark contrast to her usual melodious tweets. It was a voice I'd never heard before, a voice that certainly wasn't mine. In that moment, a shiver ran down my spine. I stared at Echo, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But the way she peered back at me with an intensity I hadn't seen before told me this was no trick of my imagination. That night, I lay in bed, the eerie echo of that unfamiliar voice haunting the edges of my mind. I told myself it was just a strange anomaly, a fluke in Echo's mimicry. Yet, somewhere deep inside, a seed of dread had been planted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly amiss. Over the next few days, Echo's behavior began to stray further from the ordinary. The phrases she spoke in that unrecognizable, deep voice became more frequent and increasingly unnerving. "They never found the truth," she would mutter, or "secrets lie beneath," always sending a chill down my spine. Each phrase felt like a piece of a puzzle I hadn't asked to solve, cryptic words that seemed to hint at something sinister. I started to wonder where she could have picked up such phrases. I certainly hadn't said them, and as far as I knew, neither had anyone who'd been in my apartment. Curiosity overcame my initial fear, and I began to delve into Echo's history. A visit back to the pet store provided the first piece of the puzzle. The owner, a kindly old man with a fondness for all his creatures, remembered Echo well. "Oh, yes, Echo. She came from an estate sale not too far from here. Belonged to an elderly gentleman who lived in your apartment complex, I believe. Passed away some months ago. Quiet fellow, kept to himself mostly." That information sent a fresh wave of unease through me. The previous owner of my bird had lived in my building, and he had died. The coincidence was unsettling. That night, the apartment felt different. The walls seemed to close in on me, and every creak and groan of the building sounded more ominous than before. Echo's cage, usually a source of comfort, now felt like a harbinger of secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. Echo's strange phrases continued, each one more chilling than the last. Hidden in plain sight, she croaked one evening, her eyes locked on mine with an intensity that felt almost human. Sleep became elusive. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions about the previous owner and what secrets Echo might be trying to reveal. It felt as though the apartment itself was hiding something that had been waiting quietly in the shadows, biding its time. The once comforting solitude of my apartment had been replaced with a sense of being watched, of not being alone. I could almost feel the weight of unseen eyes on me, and in the quiet hours of the night, I would sometimes catch myself listening intently, half expecting to hear a whisper in the dark that wasn't Echo's. My life began to revolve around the mystery of Echo's phrases. I spent hours researching the history of my apartment complex, delving into local news archives for any scrap of information about the previous owner. His name was Harold, and he had lived a reclusive life, rarely interacting with other residents. The cause of his death was ruled as natural, but the articles offered little else. Meanwhile, Echo's behavior grew increasingly bizarre. She would often stare at specific corners of the apartment, her gaze fixed and unblinking, or react to noises I couldn't hear. It was as though she was attuned to something beyond my perception, something lurking just beneath the surface of my mundane existence. One particularly unsettling incident occurred late one evening. I awoke to find Echo out of her cage, perched on the windowsill, staring intently at the moonlit sky. She turned to me and in that deep gravelly voice said, "The walls speak of hidden sins." I had never let her out of her cage at night, and the window had been securely closed. I couldn't explain how she got there. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I started a thorough inspection of my apartment. That's when I discovered something chilling. Behind a loose panel in the living room wall, there was a hidden compartment. Inside, I found various old items: a dusty fedora, a faded photograph of a woman I didn't recognize, and, most disturbingly, a leather-bound diary. The diary belonged to Harold. Its pages were filled with ramblings about conspiracies, hidden treasures, and betrayals. It painted a picture of a man consumed by paranoia and loneliness. But one entry stood out. It detailed an argument Harold had with another resident, a dispute over something valuable that was supposedly hidden in the building. As I read, Echo's voice echoed in my head: "They never found the truth." The realization hit me like a cold wave. Was Echo repeating Harold's last thoughts? His fears and obsessions? The apartment felt even more oppressive after that discovery. Shadows seemed to linger longer, and the silence was heavier. Echo's cryptic phrases became a constant, eerie soundtrack to my life. It was as if the bird and the apartment were sharing a secret, a dark truth that was slowly unraveling before me. Then, things started to happen that I couldn't just explain away. Objects in my apartment began to move seemingly on their own. Doors would open and close without any reason, and I would often catch glimpses of something or someone out of the corner of my eye. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, a side effect of the stress and sleepless nights, but deep down, I knew it was something more. Something connected to Harold, to Echo, and to the secrets that were buried within these walls. It was a stormy night when the pieces of this horrifying puzzle finally fell into place. Echo was more agitated than usual, her feathers ruffled, her eyes darting around the room as if tracking unseen movements. Then, amidst the howling wind and rain, she spoke in that deep, unfamiliar voice, but this time the message was shockingly clear. Beneath the floorboards, truth lies buried. Driven by a mix of fear and desperation, I pried up the floorboards in the corner of my living room, where Echo often stared. What I found there made my heart stop. A small, rusted metal box, its contents a testament to a hidden past. Inside the box were old letters, newspaper clippings about a missing woman, and a small blood-stained knife. The letters were written by Harold to the woman in the photograph I'd found earlier. They spoke of a forbidden affair, a planned elopement, and a betrayal that ended in tragedy. As I pieced together the story from these fragments, Echo's role in this macabre tale became horrifyingly clear. She was mimicking not just Harold's voice, but his last moments of madness and guilt. The phrases she uttered were his confessions, his fears, his warnings. I felt a chill run down my spine as the realization dawned on me. Harold had been involved in something terrible, something that had ended in violence. And now, it seemed his restless spirit had found a voice through Echo. The apartment was no longer just a living space. It felt like a tomb, a place where the echoes of a long-forgotten crime lingered in the air. I could almost feel Harold's presence, his guilt and paranoia permeating every corner of the room. In a panic, I tried to leave, to escape the oppressive atmosphere and the chilling revelations. But as I reached for the door, it slammed shut on its own, the wind from the storm howling like a chorus of anguished spirits. I was trapped, surrounded by the remnants of a dark past that refused to stay buried. Echo's voice, now unmistakably Harold's, filled the room, repeating the same phrase over and over. Beneath the floorboards, truth lies buried. It was a mantra, a confession, a curse that bound me to this place of secrets and lies. I realized then that I was not just living in an apartment, I was living in the aftermath of Harold's tormented soul, a soul that had found a way to speak from beyond the grave, through echo. The horror of my situation was overwhelming, and I knew that I had to find a way to break free from this nightmare, to silence the echoes of the unheard that haunted me. In the wake of the harrowing discovery, the apartment felt more like a prison than a home. The air was thick with the residue of Harold's secret, and Echo's incessant repetition of his last words only deepened the sense of dread. It was as if the bird, and through her, Harold himself, were holding me captive in this narrative of guilt and sorrow. Determined to free both myself and Echo from this haunting, I delved further into Harold's diary. The more I read, the more the story of a man tormented by his own actions unfolded. Harold had loved deeply, but his love was tainted with jealousy and rage. The woman in the photograph, it turned out, was a local who had disappeared years ago, her fate a mystery to the town. The realization that I was living in the same space where such a tragic tale had unfolded made my skin crawl. Echo's phrases now made sense. They were the outpourings of Harold's guilt-ridden psyche. But knowing this only made the situation more unbearable. The apartment felt contaminated by the past, every corner whispering secrets of the long dead. I started to experience more inexplicable occurrences. Lights would flicker without cause, cold drafts appeared from nowhere, and I often heard faint whispers just beyond the edge of hearing. It was as if Harold's restless spirit had been stirred up by my discoveries, his presence growing stronger by the day. In a desperate attempt to rid myself and my home of this haunting, I gathered Harold's belongings, the diary, the letters, the photograph, and the knife, and decided to remove them from the apartment. My hope was that by doing so, I could also dispel the spirit that seemed to cling to them. As I carried these items out, Echo became frantic, fluttering around her cage as if in a panic. Her voice, now unmistakably Harold's, grew louder, more insistent. It was as if she was trying to stop me, to keep the secrets and the spirit they harbored within these walls. Ignoring Echo's protests, I left the apartment, the items in tow. The night air felt like a cleansing breath, compared to the stifling atmosphere I had left behind. I buried Harold's possessions in a secluded spot in the nearby woods, hoping that by doing so, I would also bury his tormented spirit and the dark past it represented. Returning to the apartment, I felt a slight easing of the oppressive atmosphere, but it was clear that something still lingered. Echo was silent now, her eyes following me with an intelligence that seemed far beyond that of a mere bird. I knew then that while I might have quieted Harold's spirit, I hadn't completely eradicated its presence. That night, I lay awake, contemplating my next move. Leaving the apartment seemed the only option, but a part of me felt responsible for Echo, for the strange bond she had formed with Harold's spirit. I was caught in a dilemma, torn between the desire to escape and the need to resolve this haunting once and for all. The decision to leave the apartment came to me not in a moment of fear, but rather in a moment of clarity. As dawn broke, casting a soft light into my once cherished living space, I realized that some secrets are too heavy for one person to bear. The echoes of Harold's troubled past, now interwoven with my own life through Echo, were a burden I could no longer shoulder. I packed my belongings, each item feeling heavier than the last, as if I were also packing away the memories and fears of the past weeks. Echo, silent now, watched me with those knowing eyes. There was an understanding in her gaze, a recognition that our time together was at an end. As I prepared to leave, I opened Echo's cage for the last time. "You're free now, Echo," I whispered, but she made no move to leave her familiar perch. It was as if she, too, had become a part of this place, a guardian of the secrets that the walls held. With one last look at the apartment, I closed the door behind me, leaving Echo and the remnants of Harold's spirit behind. The decision to leave her was heart-wrenching, but I knew it was for the best. Echo was no longer just a bird, she had become a vessel for something much larger and darker than herself. As I walked away from the building, the weight on my shoulders began to lift. The sun's rays felt warm and comforting, a stark contrast to the chill of the haunted apartment. Yet, even as I moved on, a part of me remained vigilant, looking over my shoulder, half expecting to hear Echo's voice or see a shadow from the past. The story of Echo and the secrets she revealed would stay with me, a haunting reminder of the thin veil between the present and the past, the living and the dead. Though I had left the physical space of the apartment, the echoes of the unheard would linger in the corners of my mind, a whispering presence that would never fully fade. And so, I started anew, in a different place, under a different sky. But the experience had changed me. No longer would I view the world with the same innocence. I had looked into the heart of a mystery, and in doing so, I had glimpsed the shadowy depths that lie beneath the surface of our everyday lives. Echo's voice, and the secrets it carried, would forever be a part of me, a chilling reminder of the unseen forces that shape our destinies. The world beyond my apartment walls always seemed vast and unmanageable, a chaotic expanse where I felt like a mere speck. But within these walls, in my small cozy living room, I found a refuge. It was here that my aquarium stood, a serene little world of its own, teeming with vibrant life. I often found solace in the gentle hum of the filter and the soft rhythmic dance of the fish. It was my escape from the mundane routine of my life. My fascination with my aquarium was more than a mere hobby. Each fish was a character in a silent play, their bright colors and fluid movements offering a silent comfort to my introverted nature. I would sit for hours, coffee in hand, watching them glide effortlessly through the water, lost in my thoughts. It was during one of these quiet evenings, the room lit only by the soft glow of the tank, that I first noticed something peculiar. The fish, usually so independent in their movements, began to swim in unison, their bodies aligning in a strangely deliberate pattern. At first, I dismissed it as a curious quirk of their behavior. But as days passed, these formations grew more intricate, more intentional. They weren't random, they were symbols. I leaned in closer, my breath fogging the glass, as the fish swam in a circular pattern, their bodies curving and aligning in a way that was almost ritualistic. It was mesmerizing, hypnotic even, and a chill ran down my spine. There was something unnerving about seeing these mindless creatures perform such a coordinated act. It felt like a message, a code I was compelled to decipher. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would lead me into the depths of the unknown, a journey that would unravel the very fabric of my reality. Curiosity soon turned into an obsession. Each day, I found myself eagerly waiting for the evening, for my private aquatic show to unveil its mysteries. I started recording their movements, playing back the footage, pausing at moments when the fish formed clear patterns. It was on one such night, eyes strained and mind racing, that I saw a distinct symbol, an almost perfect circle with intricate lines radiating from its center. It was unlike anything I'd seen in nature art. Compelled to understand, I turned to the internet, diving into forums and ancient texts, seeking anything that resembled this enigmatic design. It was deep in the digital archives of an obscure maritime history forum that I found a match. The symbol was identical to an ancient rune associated with a long-forgotten sunken city, a place of legend and dark tales. According to the legends, this city was once home to a mysterious civilization, one that had mastered the secrets of the sea, only to be swallowed by its depths in a cataclysmic event. The symbol was said to be a mark of the city, a sign of its power and knowledge. Sleep became a distant memory as I dug deeper. The story spoke of otherworldly beings, of a cult that worshipped these aquatic entities, believing them to be gods. There were chilling accounts of sailors and adventurers who had encountered these symbols and were never heard from again, their fates forever lost to the sea. Each discovery sent shivers down my spine, but I couldn't stop. The fish, with their mysterious dance, had opened a door, and I felt compelled to look into the abyss that lay beyond. I was no longer just a quiet observer of a small aquarium, but a seeker of hidden truths, standing on the precipice of a world unknown and terrifying. As the days blurred into nights, the fish in my aquarium became increasingly synchronized in their movements. The symbols they formed grew more complex, more frequent. It was as if they were trying to communicate, their silent aquatic ballet, a desperate message from the depths. The air in my apartment felt heavier, charged with an unseen energy that made my skin prickle with unease. My obsession consumed me. I pored over ancient texts and online forums late into the night, trying to decipher the symbols. The more I learned, the more isolated I became, my friends' calls and messages left unanswered. The world outside my apartment seemed distant, irrelevant. All that mattered were the fish and their cryptic dance. But as my research deepened, so did the strangeness surrounding me. Objects in my apartment began to move inexplicably. Books would fall from shelves, pictures would tilt on walls, and I often caught glimpses of shadows darting in the corner of my eye. At night, I'd lay awake, listening to the eerie whispers that seemed to emanate from the aquarium, a chorus of voices speaking a language I couldn't understand. I started to document these occurrences, my rational mind trying to make sense of it all. But there was no rational explanation. The fish were no longer just pets, they were conjured to something ancient, something beyond my understanding. The climax of my research came one stormy night. I had stumbled upon an old maritime journal, its pages yellowed with age, detailing the rites of a cult that worshipped sea entities. The rituals described were eerily similar to the patterns my fish were making. As I read, a cold dread settled in my heart. The journal spoke of a final symbol, one that would open the gates to the underwater city, unleashing its forgotten power. That same night, as thunder rumbled outside, the fish began their dance again. This time, their movements were frantic, desperate. They swirled around the tank, faster and faster, their bodies blurring into a whirlpool of scales and fins. And then, in a chilling moment of clarity, they formed the final symbol. The water in the tank began to swirl violently, creating a vortex that seemed to defy the laws of physics. I stood frozen, unable to look away, as a ghostly apparition emerged from the depths of the tank. It whispered in a voice that filled the room, a voice that seemed ancient and otherworldly. The words were indecipherable, yet they resonated in my mind, visions of the sunken city flashing before my eyes. The room around me transformed, the walls melting away to reveal a vast, dark ocean, its waters teeming with shadows and forgotten souls. I was in the heart of the abyss, facing the lost secrets of the deep, a realm where reality and nightmare merged into one. Panic gripped me as the once familiar walls of my apartment twisted into this nightmarish underwater realm. The ghostly whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that seemed to echo from the depths of time. My mind raced, struggling to grasp the reality unraveling before me. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. The visions of the sunken city were overwhelming, images of twisted spires and shadowy figures haunting the murky waters. The apparition hovered before me, its form shifting and pulsing, as if made of the very essence of the sea. Desperation took hold. I knew I had to break this connection, sever the tie that bound my world to the abyss. With trembling hands, I reached for the aquarium, the source of this nightmare. I pushed it, watching in horror and relief as it shattered on the ground, the water spilling out like a flood of released spears. The apparition let out a wail, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very core of my being, and then it vanished, the swirling waters with it. The visions faded, the haunting images of the city sinking back into the darkness from which they came. I was left in the ruins of my living room, the shattered pieces of the aquarium scattered around me. The fish were gone, vanished with the water that had been their home. But the symbols, those haunting designs they had formed, were now etched into the hardwood floor where the tank had stood, a permanent reminder of the abyss that had touched my life. In the days that followed, I tried to return to normalcy, but the experience haunted me. The whispers had stopped, the shadows had receded, but the sense of an unseen presence lingered. I moved out of the apartment, unable to bear the weight of what had transpired, but the memory of that night, of the apparition and the sunken city, remained etched in my mind. My life after the incident was like wandering through a fog, the edges of reality blurred and uncertain. I found myself in a new apartment, a new neighborhood, but the shadows of that night in my old living room never left me. I tried to tell myself it was all a product of stress, a hallucination, but the symbols etched in the floor of my old apartment were too real, too tangible. I avoided aquariums, the sight of them bringing an involuntary shiver down my spine. But sometimes, on quiet, lonely evenings, I found myself missing the gentle hum of the filter, the serene dance of the fish. It was a bittersweet longing, tinged with fear and fascination. The symbols became an obsession for others. My story, shared in hushed tones on online forums, turned into an urban legend. Some dared to visit the old apartment, now empty and forlorn, to catch a glimpse of the mysterious etchings. But for me, they were a reminder of a door I had opened to a world best left unexplored. And still, in moments of solitude, I caught myself seeing those patterns elsewhere in the clouds, in the arrangement of leaves, in the swirls of coffee in my cup. Each time, a chill would run down my spine, a silent question lingering in my mind. Was the connection truly severed, or was a part of me still lost in the depths of that underwater abyss? I moved through life with a new sense of caution, a wariness of the unknown. The experience had changed me, left a mark as indelible as the symbols on the floor. The abyss had gazed into me, and in its depths, I had seen something ancient and terrifying, a truth too vast and dark for the human mind to hold. So, I lived with the constant nagging thought that somewhere, in the deep, dark recesses of the world, it was still out there. The city, the beings, the secrets of the deep, they were hidden, but not gone. And in my most vulnerable moments, I wondered if they too remembered me, if our paths would ever cross again. For now, there remained whispers of a nightmare, echoes of a reality too horrifying to face, a truth lurking just beneath the surface of my everyday life.